to go. The City of Grant Planning Commission meeting of Tuesday, July 18th, 2017 is now called to order. First order of business would be the Pledge to the Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would like to have a motion to approve the minutes of June 20th.
I'll make that motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. The agenda first. Sorry, missed that. Oh, I need a motion to approve the agenda as written.
I will make that motion.
Second it.
All in favor of approving the agenda as written? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Now, I need a motion to approve the minutes of the June 20th, 2017 Planning Commission meeting.
Move.
Second?
I'll give a second.
All in favor of approving the Planning Commission meeting minutes of June 20th, 2017, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Good. It is approved. For new business, we have an application for text amendment to allow community solar gardens in A1 and A2 zoning districts. Jennifer, would you like to go through some things for us, please?
Sure. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Before you this evening, we have a request and an application for an amendment to Chapter 32, our zoning ordinance. And actually, yep, if you could leave the PowerPoint on, that would be great. So the applicant this evening is actually United States Solar Corporation, which in your packets this evening and in the narrative is actually U.S. Solar, abbreviated. And the owner of the property in which a subject development would come forward, but is not the subject of the application this evening, is actually Joyce Wielander's property, which is located at 10381 83rd Street North. The property that the owner owns is guided and zoned A1 at the current moment. The application this evening, though it should be noted, is actually to amend the text related to all properties that would have similar zoning and guiding, either A1 or A2. So we'll take a look at that in just one moment. The request this evening is essentially to allow for community solar gardens, which we currently do not address in our ordinance. So if you looked into our definitions in our conditional use permit, standards and permitted uses per the zoning districts, we don't really have anything that's similar to a community solar garden. In fact, we're kind of silent when it comes to solar development as a whole, both residential and commercially in the community. For that reason, the applicant, when they contacted the city, was told that we really don't have a mechanism to review this against, and is not part of our ordinance, and therefore it would essentially be not permitted per our ordinance. Thus, the way that they can move forward with at least initiating the discussion from a community perspective is to request the text amendment, which is what's before you this evening. It should be noted that in, I believe it was June, the City Council actually also adopted a moratorium related to solar developments. The city attorney is with me this evening as well. He worked on that moratorium. The council did adopt that. The purpose of the moratorium in general was actually to say that we don't have standards in place right now with respect to solar developments. And so one of the tools and mechanisms that the city can use is actually to put a moratorium in place to say, while we study solar development or solar types of ordinances, that we wouldn't review and we wouldn't permit any sort of development of such facilities or community solar gardens. So that moratorium was adopted by the City Council and is in place right now. So I just want to bring that to the attention of the planning commissioners. This evening there was a duly noticed public hearing, so we will be looking for some public testimony this evening with respect to the request as well. Section 32-116 of the city's ordinance addresses amendments to the zoning ordinance. You can see based on this definition that actually there's various ways in which an amendment can be requested. can either be initiated by the city council, the planning commission, or by a resident or a landowner. In this case, you'll see on the application that it's a joint application. So the owner is the property owner, which is Joyce Wielander, and then the applicant is actually US Solar. So because there's a property owner within the community that is a party to the application, they can initiate the process. So as I said, that's in section 32-116. So some of the things that you should consider as we review the text amendment and what's being proposed are essentially looking at whether or not the proposed amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So as you know, in our comp plan, we have various objectives, strategies, et cetera, that talk about what we'd like to see in the various land use designations. So one of the things that you need to take a look at is whether or not the proposed amendment is consistent with what you wanted to achieve within the adopted comprehensive plan. The second piece of it is to look at, okay, we're proposing a specific use, or they're proposing to amend the ordinance to allow and permit a certain use. And is that use consistent with the zoning district regulations and the intent and purpose of those zoning districts? So we'll take a look in just one moment that the proposal is to amend A1 and A2 of the zoning. So those are the two zoning districts that you'd be looking at for the intent and purpose and whether or not this proposed use is consistent with those zoning districts. The third thing that you should consider is whether or not the proposed use has the potential to negatively impact health, safety, or welfare within the community. So zoning legislation, or the enabling zoning legislation, essentially says that when you make a decision with respect to your zoning ordinance, is there any possible public health, safety, welfare implications of what you're proposing or what you're going to change or allow to be used a property for. Finally, if you deem that the proposed change is consistent, so generally speaking you like the use, the next question is, based on what has been proposed this evening, is there enough information there, and is it adequate, or is there additional standards or considerations that you'd want to make to the ordinance before just allowing it to be put into place? So this slide identifies what was proposed in the actual application this evening. So there was a bit of narrative that's in your packets this evening, but what was actually being proposed in terms of the changes to our ordinances are section 32-1, which is to add a definition for a community solar garden. The definition as proposed by the applicant is a community solar garden is solar energy production facility that generates between 200 and you might have to tell me
kilowatts AC.
Kilowatts AC. I didn't know if the AC was spelled out or if that was just and 1 megawatt AC of electricity, and that supplies multiple offsite community members and businesses under the provisions of Minnesota Statutes 216B, 1641, or successor statute. So that's the proposed definition of the applicant. Section 32-1 of the zoning ordinance is what addresses our definition, so that is where this definition would be located. And then in addition, they've proposed to then adjust or amend our table of uses to add the proposed use, which in this case is the community solar garden. As proposed this evening, these are our zoning districts, so this is directly from our table of uses, but again, community solar gardens is not currently on it, so this would be an addition. And under conservancy, they have proposed that it would be not permitted. It would be permitted in the A1 and A2 zoning districts with a conditional use permit, not permitted in the R1 zoning district, and not permitted in the general business zoning district. So as I stated, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but really the consideration this evening that you have to think about is that the community solar garden definition and the amendment to the table of uses would apply to all properties in A1 and A2 zoning. So while there is a specific property on which the use is contemplated, that's not part of the application this evening. So the application is really just about the text amendment this evening. So you'll see in your staff report this evening that I provided a little bit of analysis with respect to whether or not the proposed use is consistent with the comprehensive plan or consistent, and then also consistent with the A1 and the A2 zoning district. Some of staff's concern really revolved around the fact that if we're really just amending the table of uses and just providing a definition, that it really lacks the specificity in terms of what are these things and exactly what kind of performance standards might be associated with them. So it's a little bit blind from the respect of there's not a lot of detail. So things like we don't know how big these solar gardens tend to be. what types of screening are acceptable, not acceptable, where would we screen it from, the public right-of-way or from adjacent properties, things such as that. So there was really a lack of specificity. Without that specificity, it's very difficult to know whether or not the proposed use would or would not be consistent with our comprehensive plan or the A1 and A2 zoning districts, because you can imagine how some of these uses may not be consistent with what your vision is for those things. Well, it very well could be as well, but without that detail within the application and the proposed amendment, it's difficult to make a determination. So that's provided in your staff report this evening. I also, in your staff report this evening, put some items of clarification for the applicant who is here this evening. Things that staff thought when we took a look at the application, the narrative. There were some pictures that were in the narrative that were helpful in terms of kind of getting a sense of how big these gardens might be, but it really didn't give us a whole lot of information with respect to how much land area are we talking about? Is this really considered full impervious surface coverage, for example? How are those calculations made? How tall are the structures? Do the solar panels tilt? Is there glare? All of those sort of questions about what does this really actually look like in terms of the installation. Secondly, whether or not there could be some clarification with respect to screening. Obviously, these are solar panels, which means sun is very important to them, obviously. So how does that screening work, and what does it look like? What does the applicant view as acceptable? And then obviously it would be up to the city to determine, does that feel acceptable to you from that respect? But obviously a lot of times we achieve screening through tree coverage and things like that, which would likely fly in the face of what they'd be trying to achieve here. And then obviously whether or not there are other considerations that the Planning Commission thought about while you were taking a look at it. So I won't go into the recommendation or discussion at this point, although this was in follow-up to some of those questions in terms of what clarifications we might be able to get from the applicant this evening. The applicant is here tonight, so I guess I would turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair, and ask whether or not you'd like to hear from the applicant now or how you'd like to proceed.
First, does anybody have any questions for Jennifer? Justifications?
I think I'd wait till after.
All right.
Got a question.
Go ahead.
On these solar gardens, is there any knowledge of how much stray voltage for the people living next to it would have, or is there some kind of a grid protection for that?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I would ask the applicant to address that when you bring him up, because I'm sure he can speak to that with much more technical detail than I can.
Why don't we, should we bring the applicant up, and maybe we can have some questions answered through you. And you are?
David Watts.
Do you, your name? Can you?
Representing U.S. Solar. My name's David Watts. I'm a project developer at U.S. Solar.
Appropriate name.
What's that?
Appropriate name.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty fitting.
Did you required to have a name like that to work?
They're pretty strict about, it has to be a pun or something at least to get hired there.
Bridge.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
That's all right.
Jim, your question was?
Well, almost everything that generates electricity, I'm not sure about solar, but depending on the power going wherever it goes, there's usually EMFs or what's called stray voltage, and it affects humans as well as animals and whatever, if it's very strong.
Yeah.
And is there some kind of protection for that, or is it known how much there is?
It's a really good question, and I think it's super important that it's well understood in the community. If it's all right with the Planning Commission, perhaps I could just give a brief introduction before I touch on stray voltage specifically. Would that be all right? So just to set the stage a little bit, U.S. Solar is a small local business. We're headquartered in Minneapolis. We specialize in community solar projects. We spend almost all of our time focused on Minnesota projects here, although we do have a couple small operations in other states. We have worked with other jurisdictions, such as the city of Corcoran, I think a couple other cities and maybe one county, to help develop their ordinance. So it's not the first time we've gone through this, and we like sharing our perspective and trying to build an ordinance that doesn't just allow a flood of applications on every A1, A2 parcel in the city, but that's sort of carefully crafted so that, you know, any community solar garden that could be passed through the CUP process would be, you know, not harming the rural character of the community. So what is community solar? Just for folks who might not be knowledgeable of that, it's just a program currently going on in the state of Minnesota through Xcel Energy that allows for an energy customer in one place to benefit from a solar project located somewhere else. So we develop these off-site locations at ideal scale and ideal site, and then subscribers such as schools, cities, nonprofits, businesses, and even residents can subscribe to that and they would save money on their Xcel Energy bill as a subscriber. So it all started with legislation that passed in 2014. I'm pretty sure that the city of Grant hasn't had solar applicants or an actual solar application process so far. Is that correct?
As far as we know.
Okay, so in a lot of other cities and counties around Minnesota, you can see that there was a big flood of applications. That came a lot from like international companies, which saw this Minnesota market and flooded here. Now in September of 2015, there's been a lot more restrictions placed on it. So for example, projects are now limited to 1 megawatt AC in size, which translates to roughly 8 acres. So any project that you could see a CUP application on, if you were to pass this ordinance, would be limited to approximately 8 acres. And one of the things that came with these added restrictions, is that those national and international companies kind of disappeared, and now you're really just left with Minnesota companies, which, hey, that's not that bad of a thing. I guess I can sort of just touch on a couple of the questions that were raised in the PowerPoint, as well as by the commissioner over here about stray voltage. As far as height, there are two ways to rack these solar panels, and that will determine the height of the system. Fixed tilt just means that the solar panels are fixed facing south forever, they never move. Those are slightly taller, roughly, maybe 14 feet in height at maximum. And potentially, if there is a glare concern, a fixed tilt might cause more glare because, if the sun's high noon and you're hitting a fixed south tilt, it might project glare sort of linear with the horizon. The other technology is called a single axis tracker. That just means that the solar panels rotate from east to west as the sun sets and rises. This technology has a maximum height of 10 feet. So our projects, typically the height of the solar panels during operation are somewhere between maybe 4 and 7 feet at the highest. But then if we're to, late in the day, or if it snows and we want to let the snow slide off of our trackers, we have the capability to tilt it to 60 degrees. That's the maximum tilt. And at that maximum height, the absolute max of that technology is 10 feet. So those are just some parameters you could keep in mind if you wanted to propose special conditions, which after my conversation with Kim, I understood that perhaps the city was taking the approach of just kind of case-by-case basis, setting a lot of conditions, but you could surely adopt that into the actual ordinance language as well if you saw fit. As far as screening, we do a variety of things. Typically, screening is required in one way or another, and every jurisdiction is different. Coniferous trees are most often used because they provide year-round screening. However, you could do a mix. So Techni arborvitae and cardinal dogwood are two popular ones that U.S. Solar uses, and it sort of provides not just visual screening but also sort of beautification of the project. It's our intention, as well as the city's, I think, if I can assume, but they don't want these to just be on display without any screening. So it could be in your interest to either, again, case-by-case basis or in the ordinance, address screening in some fashion, 50% opacity to public roads and nearby residences, for example. That's something that we see in other jurisdictions, but just an example. The construction process, I think, was raised in Jennifer's PowerPoint staff report. This is actually a really quick process, comparatively speaking, with a lot of other construction, and it's because it's quite simple. What we use are just steel I-beams as the foundations, and then you set down the racks and basically clip solar panels into those. That whole process typically takes about 2 months. After that, there's usually a month or two of electrical testing. This gets a little bit into the stray voltage thing, but of course doing quality assurance with both Xcel Energy and some independent engineers. And of course, all the projects must be constructed by licensed and certified electricians and engineers. So with those steel I-beam foundations, the amount of impervious surface on a site that's about 8 acres or 1 megawatt is typically about 0.3 or 0.4 acres of impervious surface. The rest of the project is planted with native grasses and pollinator-friendly habitat. But of course, you can address that also in your ordinance if you have specific desires as far as the vegetation. And now to get into stray voltage, which has, the media sort of takes up the stray voltage concept, and it definitely does catch on. I think that at its root, it's a little bit of a misunderstanding. So just to talk broadly about, what is stray voltage, it occurs due to improper grounding or improper, outdated, malfunctioning electrical wiring or equipment. And what happens is a very small amount of energy, typically like 10 kilowatts alternating current AC, can sort of just seep out from the grounding point. And so if there are, for example, if there's a dairy farming operation on that same property where stray voltage is occurring, then there could, in theory, be an implication to the dairy production and to the cow health and livestock health and production, I guess I would say. Dairy farms are most susceptible to this because of the conditions there. Unfortunately, a lot of times the dairy farm also causes the stray voltage, and that's why it's experienced on that property due to cow manure, urine, silage acid that sort of corrodes electrical connections, which in some cases, not all, were wired by an unlicensed electrician. So unfortunately, you do see stray voltage occur in a lot of places like that. However, all electrical facilities that get connected to the distribution grid could cause stray voltage, and I guess that's key to identify. So a new house going in, or a pole barn, or a solar energy production, or a nuclear power plant, doesn't matter. As long as it touches the distribution grid, in theory it could cause stray voltage. So stray voltage is definitely a real problem, and I think the real solution to that is ensuring that if there's any new electrical facilities to be constructed anywhere, then we should just require the most stringent guidelines, testing, procedures, certified and licensed electricians and engineers. And that's really the way to ensure it doesn't occur on a community solar garden and doesn't occur anywhere else. In sort of a broad statement, I'd say that solar and stray voltage have no relation. It's just the fact that it is an electrical facility that touches the distribution grid. This is something that a lot of third-party engineers have been asked to get involved and speak at city council meetings and county staff meetings, and that's basically the takeaway. As far as I guess now would be a good time if there are any other questions about just sort of what is this going to look like, what can we expect? Otherwise, I can just kind of run through here what we're proposing.
Well, I was just going to ask so you have the panels, or the modules, I guess, and then you have some kind of a electrical transformer underneath each of these panels that connect them all. and then so it's a series type thing, and then you take that voltage and you transmit it to power lines where you're feeding Excel, or you're feeding what?
Pretty close. So each, it's called a tracker table because we use, again, the single axis trackers that are a little shorter and don't cause as much glare. Those have sort of along those tracker tables, they'll run an electrical line underground, and each tracker table will be connected by what's called a string inverter. Maybe about 40 string inverters on the site. They're real small. And they connect, again, all the wiring connections are done underground that way. They connect to one central transformer that takes the electricity production and makes sure that it's matching the existing three-phase distribution line, which every one of these community solar garden projects would be connecting to. So existing line owned by Xcel Energy, we produce up to 1 megawatt of electricity that passes through string inverters to a transformer, gets ramped up, and so it just sort of seamlessly connects to the grid. There's not, it's not that we're increasing the total energy on the grid, we're just feeding it with a different resource. We're diversifying the energy mix. So if we add 10%, they'll take 10% out of a different energy production somewhere else.
So basically it's more of a green, so you're supplementing the energy that Xcel is giving to homes, but it's more of your solar panel. So I'm just wondering, who do you feed?
Yeah, so there's two ways to answer the question. The first, where do the actual electrons that were produced by our solar project, where do they go? They just go to the nearest draw. So if they're located near like a city hall or a school district or a hospital or just homes, whatever is nearest and using energy is going to consume those electrons. It doesn't...
Through the solar garden or through Xcel?
So our solar garden produces, all that energy goes directly onto that same distribution grid that is currently feeding this building. Yeah, Xcel's. And so it would just it would be delivered the same way, no change. It's there's obviously no discrimination.
So you're backfeeding Xcel. You're getting money for that electricity that you're selling to Xcel, and then we buy energy from Xcel. How do we to get a benefit out of the solar garden?
Yeah, so the way it works is Xcel signs a contract with us called an interconnection agreement. This project in particular has an interconnection agreement already signed with Xcel. It says for 25 years we'll accept the power that will be generated from this facility. And for each kilowatt hour of energy produced, there's a bill credit that Xcel says, okay, we got this bill credit for you. Where do you want it to go? So they're not saying, Xcel's contract with us doesn't say I'll pay you X dollars. It says I'll give you bill credits and you can tell me where to put them. So right now, Watertown Mayor Schools, University of Minnesota, City of Annandale, City of St. Cloud, et cetera, we've got these subscribers, and what they do is they receive the bill credit from Xcel Energy, which it just literally credits their bill. It's a subtraction line item on their bill. And then they pay us for the same amount of bill credits. They're paying a smaller rate to US Solar than the bill credit from Xcel Energy, so they save money. And it's a no upfront cost type of deal. It's just a monthly subscription.
So how do you propose Grant takes advantage of this?
We would love to talk with the city about subscribing to a community solar garden. We have others under development that aren't in the city of Grant.
You'd power this building for less expense of electricity, so it'd be a 10% reduction in electricity costs for this building.
Approximately, yeah, 10, 15, something like that.
And what else? Do you provide discounts to all the residents of Grant too, or just
we would love
public
to.
works buildings?
We would love to. We're just actually rolling out our residential program. So historically, US Solar has only really offered to like a credit-worthy entities. So that's where we get the school districts and the cities. But we are just starting our residential program probably later this summer, very soon actually. We would love the city's residents to participate. We have projects that are located in Washington County that aren't located in the city itself. So, either way that opportunity might be available, but certainly, and the same goes for the city.
But what you normally do is you provide cities. hospitals, county buildings, things like that.
Yep, the target field, for example, too. Yeah.
So you get bill credit, I'm sorry. So you get bill credits from NSP, and your subscribers, you're giving them some portion of that bill credit and you're keeping the rest for profit? Is that how you make your money?
No, so the way US Solar makes their money, and I'll always be upfront about this because I think it helps people understand how the program works. The way we make our money is, let's say the city of Grant subscribes to our solar garden for 100 kilowatts, just because that's an easy number. So you're paying, call it 12 cents per kilowatt hour to US Solar for the next 25 years. That's the rate that you've agreed to, and it'll never change. So you pay us 12 cents on 100 kilowatt hours, and then XL Energy, we've told XL Energy, hey, 100 kilowatt hours worth of bill credits is to go to the city of Grant. And they give you a bill credit. Right now, that's worth like 12.4 cents. And it's expected to go up every year because that's what XL's rates do. They go up. So day one, you'd be having a savings of pretty small, a fraction of a cent for every kilowatt hour that you subscribe. That'd probably result in, a few $1,000s first year. But it goes up over time because your rate to US Solar is flat for 25 years, whereas XL's rates increase by, 2.5% or so every year over the last 30 years.
And so your profit is coming from where then?
Our profit, sorry, yeah, I sort of got carried away, but our profit comes from, if we make more money on that 12 cents that I told you I'm charging the city of Grant in this hypothetical scenario, 12 cents times all of the kilowatt hours of all of our subscribers for any one given solar garden. If we make more money there than we spent to develop the project, then we profit. It's a good business model for all that are involved, really.
How many years is your typical break-even point?
It's really going to depend on some of our larger projects that came before this whole 1 megawatt cap. It was sooner. Now it's a little later. If I had to guess, I'd say probably year, for US Solar, probably year 17 or so of the 25, and then the rest would be revenue without expense. A solar garden is almost entirely, probably 95% or so, the investment is done before day one because the sun's free. We're not shoveling coal into a fire. So it's just the basic operations and maintenance.
How many years was the payback?
My guess was 17, but really it's nothing more than a guess. I don't work in our financial modeling department. That's a little bit out of my league.
I assume you're not involved with the solar farm in Scandia?
No, sir.
Are you familiar with it? Or have you seen
I think, is it on Manning Trail? It's a really big one.
Manning in 97 have the highways?
Sounds about right. I have heard about it because we considered a community solar garden in that general area. We're not currently developing one over there, but I did hear about it.
Besides the panels, what's your biggest structure? There's like a house that's maybe some sort of central control. Do you have some sort of structure or accessory building?
No buildings, no, nothing like that. The tallest thing in the field would be the solar panel, which again is at absolute maximum height, 10 feet.
Then all the wiring you would bury is what you said.
The only other thing that's sort of stationed on the ground is the one central inverter, which is just a little slab of concrete, maybe 5 by 5 feet or something like that. Considering that it's a approximately 8-acre project, that's pretty good. We're not sinking concrete footings as the foundation. Again, it's just the steel I-beams.
David, you mentioned the maximum size is about 8 acres.
Correct.
Is there a minimum size where it would not be practical for you to do a
I see.
project like this?
So I would, if I were running the business, I probably wouldn't construct a community solar garden any smaller than 250 kilowatts. So a quarter of the maximum size. Just probably wouldn't be worth the investment.
Okay.
Not worth the time and money it takes.
Okay. Another question is, is there anything like a transformer or anything that creates sound or noise?
No, so one of the good things about community solar gardens is they don't create noise. There's no odor. Again, there should absolutely not be glare if you're doing it right. And there's a very easy tool to use for developers like US Solar to confirm that there's no glare. So feel free to toss it in your ordinance as a requirement to use the solar glare hazard analysis tool, and just verify that none of the adjacent uses would have any glare experienced.
Another question is, I know solar panels are a very dark color, almost black. When you have, say, an 8-acre space of this, is there a heat island effect?
No, so that's a good question. And actually, if you're talking about a totally different technology, which is, you'll see it maybe in like kind of the Nevada desert, they have that sort of mirroring solar technology where it mirrors it to one central point that gathers all the energy. That I have heard, I don't know personally, but I've heard that actually does create sort of a heat island effect. From this, the panels themselves will warm up a few degrees just because they're dark and surface, like you said. And it's typically enough to, over time, melt the snow. But no, the actual land itself or above the land doesn't experience an increase in temperature.
Okay.
And I guess another point that I haven't talked about that might not be how you first picture solar is there's actually quite a bit of space between the rows of panels. The designs can vary a lot, but I'd say average is probably something like 18 or 19 feet between rows of panels, and everything besides the steel I-beams gets planted with the vegetative cover.
Another question on lifespan. I believe in the narrative here, I believe I read about 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
What happens after the lifespan is up?
So as far as the equipment, we have 25-year warranties that the production will be at least 80% of what it was on day one. From an energy production facility, that's really good. So, we would be interested in going further than that, and we think that our equipment will be good for, maybe 40 years. But typically we don't propose that in the ordinance. So what we would do is, and the way that our lease is set up, is that it has sort of this first 25-year period followed by some extension options of 5 years apiece. And so with Xcel Energy, it would work the same way. It's just a 25-year contract. We would need to request from them an extension, and we would need to request from the city an extension past whatever the term is you decide for the CUP.
I'm assuming that you have to buy weather insurance for hail and 70-mile-an-hour wind, it'll tear them up.
Yeah, we need a lot of insurance. That's definitely something that's covered. The panels themselves are wind tunnel tested at 100 miles per hour. They also get hail tested. I don't know the stat offhand, but severe weather is a factor in Minnesota for sure. So the panel design and the warranty will take care of that.
Have you ever had any of your projects, after being up for a short time, fall apart and get shut down?
Fall apart, like from a technical, like the equipment, or
No,
just in general?
Have somebody wanting to change their mind about being in the business and they want their land back, or?
So I definitely not at US Solar. I don't even know of a case where that's happened because, again, the investment of a solar garden is done before day one, almost all of it. And so if you have a project that's already been invested, you have a site control lease that's good for at least 25 years. You've got an interconnection agreement with Xcel Energy saying they'll buy the energy for 25 years, and you have a use permit that's saying it's good for at least 25 years. We're definitely not walking away from it because at that point it's all revenue, no expense.
Mm-hmm.
And to that point, because this is a pretty popular question, what happens if US Solar goes out of business? If we were to go out of business, which we don't want to, and we intend to own and operate the projects for their entire life, what happens is the project itself is set up as its own project company or its own LLC that services only that project. All of the documents, like the interconnection agreement, our operations and maintenance contract, the site lease, the subscription agreements, all of that is connected to that project company. So if US Solar goes out of business, What's left is a perfectly functioning asset that has every little detail is checked, and it doesn't have any more investment required, just revenue to be gained. So we'd probably have a couple dozen energy asset firms knocking on our door trying to buy it, and they'd have to follow all.
You ever have any photos of a similar project to what you're contemplating here?
Maybe.
While you're finding that, how long has U.S. Solar been in business?
So U.S. Solar itself was actually founded as a result of the Community Solar Garden program in Minnesota. So it was formed by industry veterans that have been doing this for at least a dozen years each. There are three executives. Our CEO, most notably, was the man who founded and then ran the solar division of Morgan Stanley, a huge global leader in finance. So experience-wise, it goes quite a ways. As far as the company itself, the legislation came out in 2014. We were founded in 2014. I have not a super perfect example, but I have an example of both during construction and after construction. I don't know how I can get this to project onto the screen, but can someone help me out with that, please?
Yeah, camera guy, hang on. Fire him up.
So, yeah, I'll try to. Okay, great. So you can see that this first image, which I'll try to zoom on a little bit. Whoa! This is during construction. So it's a pretty low impact construction, but obviously the ground is going to be dirt mostly when we're doing this. And so you can see these panels again are probably about 7 feet tall. And then after construction, we plant it with a vegetative seed mix that we've talked about. This one kind of went over and above the minimums. This is a project I think that Connexus did, but uses the same company that we consult with for landscaping. They didn't do as diverse of a mix. They stuck kind of to this because they wanted it to be really pretty and showcase. What we're proposing is more of a diverse mix of pollinator-friendly habitat and native grasses. I think it's probably better for the local environment. Take your pick if it's prettier or less pretty than this, I'm not sure. And of course in our application, we'll have representative photos as well as layouts and everything like that. But I hope that helped a little bit.
It looks a lot better than the one up on Manning and.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's, they can all, depending on the permitting jurisdiction and what the ordinance says, it varies a lot what they can look like. But, the first thing to consider is I believe it's a 5 megawatt project, which would make it 5 times the maximum size of any community solar garden you could face permitting with because of that change in 2015. So. If there are no other questions right now, that's fine. I can just mention, what specifically we're proposing and why. The proposed amendment, again, is to make CSGs a conditional use in Ag 1 and Ag 2. It's shown on page 5 of our application packet if you have it. I'm not sure. As for I think it was well addressed by Jennifer, so I won't recite exactly what it is unless there are questions for clarification, but I'll talk a little bit about our justification, why. Number one, these projects can still maintain the rural character of the community, especially with the new restrictions and with a well-crafted ordinance. So they're small, they're, again, about 8 acres, not very visible, and that minimizes the impact to any sort of rural character. Landowners that are participating in these would be less inclined to rezone or subdivide or develop in other ways their project, whether it's residential or whatever. And it kind of works like a conservation easement. So having a community solar garden on one parcel would thwart that parcel from going into commercial, industrial, residential development. of any kind. And in year 30, or whenever the term ends of the CUP, when the equipment's removed, you're left with land that's in really great condition. And it's, you know, in this case, it's on ag land, and it'd be totally viable to go back to ag production. Another justification is that actually, even though you would be permitting them, or you would have them as a conditional use in all A1 and A2 parcels on paper, there will be few and far between applications, I believe. There are a lot of limiting factors. I'll just list a few just to sort of give you an idea of how hard it is to find a good site. Existing three-phase distribution lines owned by Xcel Energy that are adjacent to the project, that it's an Xcel Energy service area, that it's close to a substation, that substation has capacity, that it's not too close to other community solar gardens. There's no existence of wetlands or shoreland overlays near the project, no uneven topography, and that the existing vegetation of the property is good, parcel size, zoning districts, etc. So there are a lot of limitations, and we think that we've really found an ideal site. CSGs don't require public services like police, fire, etc. There's very little traffic to and from CSGs once they're built. As far as the construction load itself, I believe it's typically about 15 deliveries total. After that, you know, we only anticipate pre-planned maintenance of the facility 3 or 4 times a year. In the first few years, the seed mix will need to be mowed a little bit more regularly so that it really catches and is more self-suffocating of weeds. But after that, we anticipate very little maintenance on the vegetative seed mix as well, because, you know, our solar panels are about 3 feet off of the ground, so we can sort of let the pollinator-friendly habitat grow freely. CSGs do not harm adjacent property values. So the most comprehensive study that's been done on this was done by Kirkland Appraisals, LLC. If you care to look it up, or I could send it to you. It takes a look at 9 different states and sales of properties adjacent to community, or sorry, not community solar gardens, but solar gardens in general, depending on the program in each state. It found no impact, positive or negative, across the 9 states. CSGs are not permanent, so again, when it reaches the end of its life, decommissioning is very simple. After 30 years without having pesticides or churning up row crops, the land's actually in really good condition. There's very minimal disturbance to soil in decommissioning the project, because what you're doing is just pulling out steel I-beams. And there's probably a handful of people in this room that could volunteer to do that. It's not too tough. CSGs benefit the environment, so again, these foundations account for only approximately 0.3 acres of impervious surface across the whole site. The rest is pollinator friendly habitat, native grasses. Among other benefits of that, those would reduce stormwater runoff by 23% for the 2-year storm, and approximately 8% for the 100-year storm. Further, pollinator friendly plants benefit nearby ag production as well. And we're using an inexhaustible resource, again the sun, to further the development of a diverse energy mix, and here in Minnesota instead of just getting our energy imported. Lastly, the one thing that's not mentioned in your application is that the CSGs benefit the community. Again, that school districts, cities, nonprofits, universities, businesses, and even residents subscribe to CSGs, or community solar gardens, and they save money on that energy bill for no upfront cost. So for me, the conclusion here is that these proposed amendments allow the city to maintain its rural character while benefiting the tax-paying landowner who wants to opt into this Minnesota SET program, benefiting the environment and the community. And for these reasons, US Solar respectfully requests that the city would adopt the ordinance for community solar gardens in Ag 1 and Ag 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Dave? I think we should.
Quite thorough.
Right?
I say he was quite thorough.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess we should open this up to a public hearing. Need a motion to open it up to public hearing?
I will make that motion.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of having the public hearing open, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
All opposed? All right, the public hearing for the text amendment to allow community solar and gardens is now open.
We have a 3-minute time period, what are we gonna do for?
Yeah, as always, we'll limit the time for people to speak. Hopefully, if there are questions that are asked before you, we ask you not to come up and ask the same question. And when you do come up, please sign in your name and your address. So, would anybody like to speak during the public hearing on the community solar gardens?
Going once, going twice.
Nobody? Oh, we have somebody.
Oh, here it is.
Here we go.
Oh, Joyce is coming.
Joyce Wheelander, 83rd Street. I'd be one of the volunteers to help plow up the dirt after it's over with. Also, they mentioned a tree line where the land is located down on 12. There's a whole tree line, so I think they'll be saved from having to plant extra trees and things like that. I'd also like to comment that about a year ago, I was at the board meeting, and Jerry Gadboy's land was permitted to put, I don't know if it's a rink or something of that kind. And when the council was asked that question, the mayor then said the landowner could do, it was his land, he could do what he wanted on it. So I'm hoping you give this consideration. I know across the farm down there where this land will be, it will provide electric, I'm sure, to a lot of those new homes in the farms of Grant, as well as hospitals, other places, City of Grant building. I didn't know that. So, I don't know if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joyce.
Thanks, Joyce.
Sure.
Anybody else would like to speak? All right, so we need a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to close public hearing.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
All right.
All opposed? All right, the public hearing is closed. Let's see. Right? Yeah, if you have any more questions for Jennifer or discuss more on this, I think, unless you guys have something to say.
I'd just like to say, personally, I think community solar gardens are a great thing. I'm for it. This is a first step. What we're going through tonight is the first step. I think we have to continue discussion and come up with reasonable regulations and rules to follow to put something like this in.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think this is kind of new territory for us, and some of these questions here that Jennifer raises, I think would be kind of good and take in consideration for our next, our planning for 2040. Not to say that, we wouldn't come up with something for that, but it just seems like there's a lot of things that we need to take in consideration before we adopt specific language to the.
Some people here may not be aware, but we have put a moratorium in place for 1 year to give the city an opportunity to look at what other cities have done, what we might want to do out of what they have done, pick and choose, so on and so forth. So we can come up with what would be right for Grant before we would ever consider approving anyone's application to put in a solar farm. So we're kind of in a pickle here. We do not want to approve the language for something now that our city council hasn't had a chance to look at yet, and we don't want to do something that would cross up with whatever they have planned, so,
What they've done already is the moratorium.
yeah.
So would our next step would be to ask staff to do research as far as regulations regarding community solar?
Well, at that point, go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if I might add some clarification, and Kevin can certainly jump in if I'm misstating anything. But there's a couple options that you have as a commission. The first one is to ask the applicant if he'd like to continue to move forward with us in drafting additional language that would address performance standards. So it's a little, you know, it's not typical, I wouldn't say, but it's not unusual either, from the respect of they've made an application, they have a specific use that they're interested in. They would not be necessarily drafting or leading it, but providing insight and assistance while staff studies it and prepares it. As you may or may not realize, this application is subject to Minnesota Rules 1599, or statute, excuse me. So as a result, we have a little bit of a timing piece of this that we have to be cognizant of in terms of making a decision. So some of it is working through it with the applicant if they're interested. If the applicant is not interested in that, then the commission has the option of either recommending approval of the language that was proposed by the application or the applicant this evening and passing that on to the city council, or they have you as a commission have the ability to say that you'd recommend denial of the proposed application to amend the text, and then put together some findings with respect to why. So some of those findings might be the fact that there's a moratorium in place and you'd like to see additional study done. So, you know, some of it's a little bit of what the applicant is interested in doing in terms of moving forward. Some of it is also from your perspective, how comfortable you are with the language that they've proposed, or whether or not you feel like it needs more study and more information, which sounds like the direction that you're headed in. So really there's two solutions really, but in terms of the timing piece of it, this application is subject to the 60-day rule, which can only be extended up to 120 days unless the applicant agrees to extend it beyond that and kind of go along on the ride with us as we work through the ordinance update. So hopefully that clarifies it just a little bit in terms of what your options are.
Okay. So we would ask the applicant if they're willing to go through the change and or recommendations that you put through and trying to change the language. Is that one of the options as well?
Right, one of the options would be to add additional language. So I guess I would phrase it as performance standards are really what we're looking at. I know that the Planning Commission probably hasn't gone through this process. I don't know that we've gone through this process before since the commission got put back in place, but you know, one of the things that we've looked at the council level is the idea of what types of parcels would be suitable for different uses within the zoning district, and putting some specific regulations together that are associated with parcel size, access, screening, those types of things that are general and provide the framework, which seem to be the pieces that are kind of missing out of the application. So it's really kind of up to the applicant though, whether or not they want to kind of, you know, participate, or whether or not they'd rather just have you make a decision, be clean with it, and then have us move forward because there's a moratorium.
Yeah, I mean, technically here, they've put in an application requesting specific language to be put in our ordinance, and the city really isn't required to develop a different ordinance. Your job as a planning commission and then a city council is to look at their application and say yay or nay. Do we want to approve this application or do we not? But what we're hearing from the applicant is, although they've put in a relatively simplistic proposed ordinance, it sounds like they are fully open and willing to essentially amend their application by working with us to develop an ordinance that is a little more comprehensive. And then the process would be there'd be a mutual agreement on their part that they are amending their application to say, all right, we now want our application to be not for the simplistic language that we initially applied for, but this more comprehensive language that the company and the city has worked out together, and by amending their application, then you could approve that application. But it's really kind of a give and take in terms of what language would be proposed, but ultimately, if the city wants to enact a particular ordinance that's, has more performance standards or more regulations than what US Solar prefers to have, you're always fully able to deny their application for the text amendment they're requesting, and then later on enact your own ordinance that's to your liking. So, but it sounds like in the first instance here, US Solar is more than willing to work with us to try to develop a more comprehensive ordinance, and so that would be, I think, what staff is recommending at this stage.
And he would work with,
Yeah, what's that process look like if we were to work with them? How does that work?
Well, it would likely be either city staff or the applicant proposing or drafting a first draft of proposed
feedback,
language,
and then back
and
and
then
forth.
we're exchanging back and forth to say, do you like this language, do you not? If it's something US Solar proposes to us that's more comprehensive, certainly city staff is going to go out and look at other communities that have these sort of ordinances and pick and choose and say, hey, the one that US Solar proposed to us is missing these other elements that some other cities use, and we want to add those in. And so there'd be some back and forth to a point where either staff and the applicant agree that, yep, we've come up with a good ordinance that we think will work for everyone. And then certainly we'd be also bringing these things back to the planning commission, because in part it's your job as well to be looking at these ordinances and deciding what works for the city. And so there can be future planning commission meetings as well, where we are giving you drafts to look at and provide input on, or, you know, do you like A or B better in terms of different options?
okay. All right.
I got a
Are
question.
you willing to work with the city on that? You, David, is the point person, for US Solar.
Yeah, so I will be the point person for the project. That's the role of the project developer, including working with any type of specific conditions or whatever you'd like to propose. Just to respond super quickly, you know, this wasn't an application proposing specific language, and that was intentional. You know, I'd prefer not to walk in here and say, all right, here's the ordinance, it's gonna say A, B, C, D, E, blah, 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 you know, state everything specifically. I'd prefer to sort of open up broadly, and my understanding was this was sort of a way to say, okay, first things first, let's get this on the table of uses. Right now, it's not talked about. Let's get it on the table of uses. Let's call it conditional for A1 and A2. And then you or the city council or whoever could get into the discussion of specific conditions that those projects would have to meet.
Performance standards and things like that.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'd just like to make the clarification that there's a difference between identifying conditions that would go into the conditional use permit and having a set of performance standards. They're not the same thing. So I just want to make sure that you understand that what we're talking about is putting together performance standards for the ordinance that would apply to all applications, so that when you do get a project in front of you with a specific development plan, that you're reviewing it against a set of general standards, and then you can apply reasonable conditions beyond that. So they're two separate things, and I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Mhm.
in terms of what we're looking at.
Yeah, correct. And that's typically how almost all of these ordinances work. So if that's how you'd like to proceed, I think that's a good bet. We're definitely happy to work with you. I think that, you know, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So let's borrow from examples of good ordinances that have already been enacted and take what you like and leave out what you don't. And we can provide our own perspective on our experience, because I'd say that it's without a doubt US Solar is one of, if not the most active developer in the Minnesota market right now. And so I think that we do have something to offer in terms of our perspective. A last consideration that I hadn't really brought up specifically is on the note of three-phase distribution lines in the city. And again, that is a requirement for any site to be suitable for solar. And I believe there might be some other, small portions here and there, but I believe primarily that's just 75th Street and Manning that have three-phase distribution lines on them. So that'll kind of give you a little framework. This is not going to be covering the city with community solar gardens.
If I could ask one question real quick. Excuse me. If we vote a negative response to this for our city council, but leave it wide open for staff and you to begin the negotiations or ideas, suggestions, and so on for coming up with some ordinances that we can follow. Would that be acceptable to you without causing bad feelings or?
Certainly, yeah. I won't tell you how I think you should do it logistically speaking, but I think we're on the same page that we're very willing to help, come up with performance standards in an ordinance, and if needed, modify our application or submit a new, I'll let you be the judge of that, but we're definitely interested and willing.
Well, again, I think what Jennifer's saying, that you got to work with them to come up with a set of performance standards that we're talking about. So, just, you're going to go back and forth with the city staff to figure this out, and that works.
More than happy to do so, yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, if that's the desire of the commission, then I don't know that there's any reason to recommend denial or pass any, you can essentially say
Table
it
it?
or table it.
Table it.
And allow it. The biggest thing is that the applicant, and the city need to be aware of the fact that there's the 120 days
Right.
clock that's ticking, and if we need to extend that, whether or not we'd be able to work that out. So if for some reason that seems to be not the case, that, we start running into timing logistics and they would like to move it forward, et cetera, we'll put it back on the agenda.
Okay.
And then you can make a decision whether or not you need to recommend denial or approval so that we meet that clock. But otherwise, we'll just operate under the premise that we can work together and move forward, so.
Keep it alive for now and everything. Okay.
Right.
I make a motion that we table.
Oh, wait a
Yeah,
minute.
I would like to have some discussion here before we just forward it on to the staff. There's some important questions that Jennifer raised, and I think as a planning commission, we should try to get consensus there. For example, does everyone feel that this is a community solar garden, as explained? Here is consistent with our goals of the community. I mean,
I would say it
so it
is.
seems like, okay.
The fact that they have things that are bee sensitive rather than Roundup, it's a help.
And it sounds like we already addressed the performance standards, which is gonna be worked with the staff. And there's a question of the districts A1 and A2. How does the commission feel about that?
Yeah, well,
That's your rural farm areas.
Yeah, so both, is that?
well, I think when they start going through this,
Yeah.
when they finish, then we can, I think, say, okay, we go maybe A1, maybe not A2, you know what I mean, or whatever.
Yeah, well,
Or
I mean,
both.
I don't think we really need to push all that on the staff. I think we need to maybe give some discussion or thought, amongst the commission here, because I think it's part of our job is to, do some of that. So, and these are important questions here that Jennifer listed, so I think we should possibly discuss it. And, some of the things like are we gonna have an opinion on the land area limitations or size of parcel, impervious coverage, some of those things. I just wanted to have us a chance to discuss that, if we have any thoughts or recommendations before we just hand it over to staff, so we have some input.
I think we have to comply with what he said earlier, the 8-acre area.
Yeah.
We don't have much choice there.
But
A1,
would we want to establish a minimum parcel size? I mean, are we just gonna let,
Yeah.
10.
we're just gonna let the staff come with a recommendation, we're not gonna give any input beforehand, is that?
Well, there'll be a public hearing after they come up with theirs before we can send it out back to city council for vote.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if I might offer a little bit of clarification again. So if you have any strong reactions to some of the items that were proposed this evening. So for example, they said that the land area is about 8 acres to get to the maximum power, if you will. I don't think there's anything that says that it has to be 8 acres. That's what the maximum is based on the state statute. So, if you felt strongly that that seemed to be too large of an installation, that would be something that would be helpful to know now as we go back and draft the ordinance. However, if you're comfortable with saying, well, that might be okay, depending on what kind of screening standards are put in, for example, then you can leave it open from the standpoint of we can research it, come up with it, et cetera. But if there's something specific about what you heard tonight that you felt very strongly about and would like to communicate that to staff, that would be very helpful for us moving forward as we start drafting stuff. If it seems like you'd rather have us explore it, research it, et cetera, there's nothing that seems real that you feel very strongly about, that's certainly something we can do as well. But if there's something that really stood out to you this evening that you want to make sure that we know as we go into drafting it, we certainly would want to know that this evening. So hopefully that helps a little.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I was trying to get at.
Like you're
so.
saying, minimum lot size to get the 8 acres on, like, what should it be, 20 acres? So it's things like that.
Yeah.
Is that something that you're thinking about?
Well, yeah,
Does it
and
make
that's,
no
I just, like Jennifer said, I just wanted to make sure that if, we were thinking about that, and we did have any strong feelings, that we would bring that up before we pass it on. It sounds like we're pretty open to, seeing what might come out of the staff working with the applicant.
Right.
I got a question for Jennifer. Jennifer, is there any real problem you see with okaying it for both A1 and A2? Or is there some significant difference in that code?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, really, especially over the last 5 years, I would say A1 and A2 have become much more alike than different, to be honest. If you read the intent and purpose that's stated within A1 and A2, they are slightly different in terms of what their stated purpose is. A1 is more focused on agricultural, whereas A2 is a little bit more geared towards rural residential, with hobby farms and those types of things. But in terms of, if you look at our table of uses, A1 and A2 are looking much more alike than they used to. So as far as that being a differentiator, I'm not sure that my knee-jerk reaction is I'm not sure, but I certainly would need to research it a little bit more before I could answer that definitively.
So that would be part of the thing that you would look at as well when you're going through the performance standards and everything. So,
One of the things that we did, I think, with a couple of the other text amendments that we received, was looked at how many parcels in A1 and A2, what the average lot sizes or acreages were of those things. And that then became a deciding factor in the performance standards. So for example, I can think of when we went through the wedding event barn text amendment, for example, we looked at how many parcels in the community with an A1 zoning or an A2 zoning had acreages that were above, I believe it was 20 acres, for example, and that then fronted on a county or a state road, were kind of the criteria that we were looking at. And then that kind of got us to isolating how many parcels and, something like that development could go into. So I would imagine that we might do something similar in terms of that exercise to give you some background at the next, whenever we bring it forward again, of if you approved it with these performance standards in A1 and A2, there's approximately X number of parcels in the community, for example, that this could work on. Something along those lines. So that study has yet to be done, and I imagine would be worked on as we go through this.
And does the applicant feel like they have adequate time in between now and the next meeting to work with staff to come back with performance standards?
I do, yeah. We have, we've gone through this process even quite recently, so I think we're pretty equipped.
Yeah, maybe Jennifer.
yeah, Jennifer's schedule.
I know, I was like, how about my time?
Yeah.
We'll work it out.
All right. So, should we?
I'd like to make a motion and we table this until the next commission meeting where we can hear the revised language.
We should vote that we will have Jennifer and solar representative working on.
I think that's kind of what we're saying there.
I think staff's got that direction to go ahead and do that.
We've already done that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm saying that.
All in favor of tabling this until the next staff meeting? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. This is tabled. Hopefully you will work very closely with city staff and come up with a good set of performance standards.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
You
next item on the agenda is for the conditional use permit for a horse boarding facility, 9711 Keswick Avenue North. Jennifer, what can you tell us about this?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. The second item on our agenda this evening is a request for a conditional use permit for Lanoux Stables. We are on it, we have a PowerPoint already. So with respect to a summary of the request this evening, the applicants and owners this evening are Mr. and Mrs. Lanoux, their daughters Julie, oh, I have a typo, my apologies, Julie Brady and Jamie Moeller. The property is located at 9711 Keswick Avenue North. The property is zoned and guided A2. The lot is approximately 29.64 acres. There are 3 PIDs that are associated with the parcel, or with the proposal this evening, which we will see in just a few moments. The application request is to allow for the operation of a horse boarding and training facility to accommodate up to 65 horses, which is provided in your narrative this evening. There was a duly noticed public hearing for this evening, which we will enter into after we have a little bit of a presentation and discussion. With respect to a summary of the operations, as I stated, the applicant is requesting that they be permitted to have up to 65 horses on the property. Based on the narrative, this number may fluctuate, which obviously would be fluctuate down, depending on the border showing and competition activities, breeding, and sales on the site. The applicants are proposing to utilize the existing main barn and small egg building for operations. Both those structures are existing on the site today. The main barn is approximately 13,593 square feet. The operations or the program of that main barn includes what staff assumes are stalls, a riding arena, storage, grooming areas, and a shop. The narrative also describes a lounge, a gathering area, and groomsmen's quarters, a live-in efficiency apartment / live-in efficiency apartment. However, that was not identified in the floor plan, so we'll take a look at that in just a moment. There's also a small egg building that's on the site. It's approximately 1,252 square feet. That space program includes a loafing area, a tack and storage area, and also what is assumed to be horse stalls as well. If you look at the site plan, which we'll take a look at in just a moment, there's approximately 26 acres, which is fenced in pasture, which is where the majority of the time the horses are located. There are also 2 outdoor riding arena areas, one being a large area, approximately 17,000 square feet, one being a small area, 2,000 square feet. Both of those areas were determined based on GIS information and were not provided in the applicant's material. So if you were looking for that in terms of the narrative, that's why you didn't see it there. So those are estimates. The access, both the principal's home, so Mr. and Mrs. Lanoux live on the property, their existing home, the principal structure, and then also the accessory buildings, meaning the main barn, and the small agricultural building are all accessed from one primary driveway. Based on the narrative and then also looking at the aerial and then identifying and cross-referencing that with what is on the site plan that was provided this evening, there's parking on site that can be found on the east and west side of the main barn. Based on the applicant's narrative, that there could be up to approximately 15 vehicles that are in that parking area, and I'll get into that in just a few moments as well. As stated within the narrative, there are no existing employees. However, depending on the activities, they would like to request that the conditional use permit address and allow up to 5 employees or barn staff to work at the stables. The applicant has stated that the hours of operation are generally from about 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily. However, they may be around the clock depending on what's going on with the horses. Based on the application, there are no events that are proposed to be associated or to be run from the site. Just for those of you who are interested in the audience and those looking at home, the CUP criteria is identified within the city's ordinance. It's identified in section 32-152. With respect to new uses, I identified subsection D, which basically says that conditional uses should be reviewed against whether or not they're consistent or comply with or would cause any sort of public health, safety, welfare issue with adjacent properties, and whether or not they would create, impact, negative impact, or adverse impact on adjacent roadways, et cetera. In addition, because we are looking at a horse boarding facility in operation, section 32-328 horse boarding and training of our ordinance, as well as 32-337 livestock, provides some additional guidance when we take a look at this application. Again, with respect to the existing site conditions, there's approximately 30 acres out there. There are 3 PIDs. Each of those PIDs is about 10 acres for each PID, just short of it, obviously, based on our sum total. There's an existing principal structure, the home. There's a main barn and a small agricultural building. There's the riding arena and areas. The fenced pasture area, which is located to the north of the operations, and then the existing access and driveways into the principal and accessory structures. This aerial gives you a sense of a good sense of the existing conditions. You can see those faint yellow lines up there, as well as show the topography of the site. You can see from this graphic where the riding arena is essentially located. You can also see where the main barn is. Let me see if I've got my cursor up here. So the main barn is this structure here. The principal structure is located here. And then the small egg building is located behind or to the rear of the riding area. This is the secondary small riding area here. For those of you that were wondering, it was shown on the site plan, which we'll take a look at in just one second. However, those areas were not identified or labeled on the site plan. I think that covers it. You will see also on this third PID furthest to the north that there is this small wetland area. That does pop up on the National Wetland Inventory, but obviously it appears to be, the applicant contacted the Browns Creek Watershed District, it was not flagged as an issue with respect to the application. With respect to dimensional standards, obviously this is an existing condition, so it's a little bit different in terms of how we take a look at the review. Part of the process, though, is to look at where the accessory buildings are located, what the sizes of the parcels are, et cetera, when reviewing the conditional use permit, to make sure that the operations and what's being proposed, that the existing structures, and the current conditions are compliant with our current ordinance standards for dimensions. So obviously we've got a 5-acre minimum lot size, frontage on a public road, and then the various setbacks. So based on, and I believe I have a slide that talks about it, and we'll get to it in a moment, but based on what's being proposed this evening, staff did take a look at all the applicable setbacks. The existing structures meet setbacks, and the principal structure also meets the setback. The driveway is compliant with our standards as well. So there's no issue with respect to the dimensional standards. You also see that our wetland setback is from a type 3, 4, and 5 wetlands, which based on the NWI, which is the National Wetland Inventory, it appears that that wetland that is on site is likely a type 1 or 2, which is why it wouldn't trigger this requirement and why it's within the enclosed pasture area. So I apologize for those in the audience and looking at home, but this is the electronic copy that I was provided, so it's the best I can do this evening for the PowerPoint. You can kind of get a sense of where the parcel or where the dimensions are. You can see that here's the main barn, which matches up with the aerial. This is the principal structure. Here's the riding arena, and here's the small egg building. The one thing I would like to note on this is that if you look at it, which is very difficult, but if you look in your packets this evening, there's kind of this hashed area indicating where the gravel driveways are, for example. However, it doesn't actually match up with exactly what's going on in terms of the gravel on site. So staff went into the GIS to try to get an estimate of what some of those areas might be, particularly as it related to what kind of parking would be acceptable on site. So you'll see in the packet this evening that when staff took a look at the areas based on the GIS and estimated that the applicant actually identified that there could be up to about 15 parking spaces on site, and actually based on staff's calculation, it's actually more like 27, 25, something like that. So in terms of what they're proposing for operations, there's adequate area for parking in terms of what they're proposing this evening. To give everybody a sense of what's going on with respect to the floor plan, this is the main barn that was provided. Staff is assuming that these areas 1 through 10 are the stalls, the barn stalls. I did scale those off. They look to be approximately 12 by 12. Per some research that I did with the University of Minnesota Extension Services, that appears to be an adequate size and complies with what their standard would be. So you'll see here there's 10 stalls, I believe, that are identified. The applicant can certainly verify as to whether or not that is in fact the case. You can see that there's an arena area, grooming, storage, the shop area, et cetera. As I indicated in the staff report, when you look at this floor plan and compare it to what's in the narrative, there was some mention of there being a groomsman quarters and a lounge area, et cetera. That's not identified. Obviously here, I'm assuming it's on a second floor, but that was not provided. So just for your reference. The small agricultural building is here. This is the floor plan. Again, you can see based on this floor plan that there are what appear to be 3 stall areas. Once again, a loafing area and a tack or storage area. So that is referenced in your packet as well. Here's my dimensional review. My slide got out of order. My apologies. But as I stated, all structures meet the setback and site standards for 8.2. There is no new access that is contemplated as part of this application, so the applicant is proposing to use the existing driveway. The driveway is based on the information that was provided, and then also scaling that and cross-referencing it against the aerial, appear to be approximately 15 feet wide in all areas. We actually, at the city council level, have discussed this a couple of different times. With respect to whether 15 feet would be wide enough if 2 cars were trying to pass each other, for example, and whether or not there was parking on one side of the driveway, for example. In this case, when staff scaled the gravel area, there's appropriate or adequate area on both the east and the west side of the main barn that could accommodate parking based on what's being proposed this evening. So it appears that there's no issue. If at some time there were more patrons or visitors on site, you might contemplate or be interested in looking at making sure that parking doesn't happen on one side of the driveway just so folks can get in and out, but that would be about it. As I stated, the floor plan of the main barn does not indicate some of the uses that were discussed within the narrative, so I would propose that we just ask the applicant for some clarification with respect to where those operations or where those spaces are located within the main barn. In terms of other standards and clarification, you'll see in your packets this evening that one of the things when you look at the horse boarding and training section of our ordinance, there's discussion about requiring a manure management plan, and then there's also the discussion about the MPCA and whether or not there's a feedlot registration that's required. I actually had the opportunity to speak to the woman who wrote the feedlot, I think it's feedlot registration letter that's in your packet this evening, and I spoke to her for about 15 minutes this afternoon. She informed me, because in your staff report I said I would provide a verbal update if I had the opportunity to talk to her. Because of the number of horses that are on the property or being contemplated, so even with the 60 or escalating that to 65, that it's well below the maximum number that's required for a manure management plan at the MPCA. So that is not a requirement of theirs. So you would actually need 300 animal units in order to be required to provide a manure management plan. So all that the MPCA requests is that you register the feedlot so that they know where it is. And how many horses or animal units that you have on the property, but they have no specific standards with respect to a manure management plan. I also asked her a little bit about the manure that would be generated on site as a result of 65 horses, whether the pasture area was appropriate, and how the proposed handling, if you will, of the manure as stated within the applicant's narrative would be viewed, just for her feedback. The woman that I spoke to seemed very knowledgeable about it. She said that that is not unusual, that the number of horses did not actually seem out of whack or significantly higher than what she thought that the pasture area could accommodate and could handle, and that's very typical as to how it would be handled. In terms of the manure piles themselves and then also the composting, She said that also that's very common, which based on my research at the University of Minnesota as well, that is true. So that is consistent with actually what the University of Minnesota even recommends in terms of manure management. I will note, and which is in your packet this evening, that it was a little bit confusing in the application with respect to how they were and where the location of the compost pile actually was, or where the composting was happening. So staff actually put in the report this evening that we're just looking for some clarification from the applicant this evening in terms of exactly how that's working. Again, the groomsmen quarters and proposed activities associated with that, it's referenced in the narrative, but there's not a lot of description. So staff was unclear or unsure as to whether or not those groomsmen quarters would be rented out, if they would be part of the 5 employees that were referenced within the application, those types of things. So staff was just seeking some clarification from the applicant with respect to that. With respect to other agencies, Browns Creek Watershed District was contacted. Again, we've got an existing condition and there's no construction that's being proposed at this time, so actually does not fall underneath their permitting authority at this time because there's nothing being proposed with respect to construction on the site. I've already given you a summary of my conversation with the MPCA with respect to what they take a look at in terms of the registration and also the manure management, so I will not go into that. And then finally, last slide, just a list of the conditions as drafted within your staff report this evening. So with that, excuse me, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for Jennifer? Jeez. Jennifer, you mentioned, Jennifer? Oops, sorry.
Pardon,
You
sorry.
mentioned feedlot nutrition. What is, maybe you can give me more details of what feedlot registration means and how it affects or how it applies to A2.
So the feedlot registration, if you will, just has to do with the number of animal units. And it has to do, it's directly correlated to basically the manure management essentially. So for example, the reason why the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency looks at feedlot registrations is because they have the tendency or can cause contaminants in surface waters and things like that. So there's specific step backs, for example, with respect to where you can put manure piles or those types of things from floodplains, from wetlands and wetland buffers and all those types of things. So it's a general term, and when I was speaking with the woman at the MPCA today too, it really has to do with just, do you have livestock, do you have domestic farm animals in a quantity that has the ability to generate manure, for lack of a better way of saying it. So the reality is that it's a generic term. So I realize it kind of feels a little bit maybe like a misnomer in this case because we're dealing with a horse boarding facility, but it has to do with the quantity of livestock or animals on the property.
Right. Does feedlot registration apply to A2? I thought it was only A1.
Feedlot registration, that is something that the MPCA requests. It's actually not mandated. So we have a couple of provisions within the horse boarding statement or a section that says that if you're required to get it, that you should do it, so to speak. But in this case, it's a little bit of a gray area. So the MPCA, I will say, appreciated that they registered it so that they know where the animals are located, et cetera. So it's, again, a little bit tricky because the MPCA's requirements and what we state in our ordinance don't necessarily jive 100%.
Right. Is that the A1, A2 thing then?
Back in the day, I would assume that likely played a role, particularly in when we had more commercial agricultural activities. I would guess.
Any other questions? Two.
Jennifer, in this case where you have the A1, A2 question from him, can we apply the provisions from A1 to an A2 lot on a
Is there
CUP?
a, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, is there a specific section of the ordinance that you're referencing or that you can provide me?
Yes, but I can't.
Well, I would say in general, no, you're not applying provisions of different code to different properties, but in the context of a conditional use permit, you certainly can choose to put any reasonable condition upon a use, so long as it's reasonably related to the property at issue. And so you may, even though a regulation or a condition may exist in a different section of code, you may determine that it's applicable to this particular conditional use permit, and you can add that as a condition. But in general, you would be applying, in terms of just looking at the code broadly, we look first to the code for the particular zoning district for what applies to that property.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think I know what you're referring to, so I think I can try to answer it. So the table of uses identifies commercial feedlots on the table of uses. This really doesn't fall into that category because that's not really the principal use that we're looking at. So the feedlot is kind of a side requirement, if you will, that gets referenced then when you go into section 32-337, and then also, I believe, within the horse sporting operations. So it references it separately, but the feedlot, if you will, is kind of a general term as opposed to being a commercial feedlot, which is what you're seeing on the table of uses. So it's not a direct correlation, for lack of a better way of saying it. And I believe that, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that might be what you were referencing.
Yeah. And then the other thing I was kind of wondering about, Jennifer, you were talking about the 10 stalls and 65 horses.
Well, there may be
It's
13.
60.
Actually, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, it would be 13 based on what is proposed, or what's identified between the main barn and then also the small egg building as
So
well.
then you mentioned something about, can't find it now, I was listening to you and looking at you, but something about the, how the horses will weather bad weather. You need something, Minnesota, some kind of shelter?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, when I was doing a little bit of research with the University of Minnesota and then also spoke to somebody over there, one of the things that they asked was just in terms of in inclement weather, really, they actually don't need to be sheltered based on what was stated to me at least, that they're really just looking for a windbreak in inclement weather. So staff was just asking how that's handled because it wasn't really addressed within the narrative. So it was more from a logistical standpoint of how does that happen.
What is that usually, like a lean-to or something that horses can get a windbreak? Is that what you're talking about?
There appeared to be a couple different structures, so, and it's, we'll bring the applicant obviously, and he can kind of address it, but based on my discussions with them, there's a couple different things, that can be used. There was also some discussion about blanketing the horses and whether that happens or not. So it's really just a logistical question of how that's, because we're looking at the number of horses that we are, of how that works.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions for Jennifer as we? What?
Jennifer?
That's coming up.
We're just trying to get Jennifer, if she's done, then we can,
I
ask.
have a question for her if she's available. Under action requested, you got horse boarding and training of equines at a density that exceeds 1 animal unit per 2 grazable acres is conditionally permitted per the city zoning code. Other words, what does that mean? That they must get a CUP?
That's correct. So, a conditional use per our ordinance is essentially, you can think of it as a permitted use with reasonable conditions.
Do we know what's happened in the past for CUPs for density of horses?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, there are conditional use permits in the community that allow more horses or horses above the 1 horse per 2 grazable acre. I can think of 2 or 3 off the top of my head that have animal units that are in excess of what those ratios are. I couldn't tell you exactly what the ratios are off the top of my head, but I know they exist.
I think I have a couple.
I know I do, but I can't find it.
Okay. Any other questions for Jen? Okay. Can we bring the applicant up for some questions or presentation?
My name is Jamie Moeller, and I am Larry and Maureen's daughter. I'm one of the trainers who train out of the barn. I'm Julie Brady, another daughter, and I also train out of their barn.
All right.
I'm not a horse person. So I might ask dumb questions, but how do you take care of 60 horses with
It's a lot of
13
work.
stalls?
I'll tell you, we don't do our job because we're getting paid hourly a lot. It's because it's a passion that we have and we love it. So it is a lot of time and a lot of work, but there's...
Yeah, as far as only having the 13 stalls, we have shelters and we keep every horse on the farm blanketed. We're spending a lot of time switching out
Yeah.
blankets depending on weather.
We do also have lean-to sheds, but oddly enough, the horses tend to never go to the lean-to shed when you would think they should be in it. They choose, there's woods and trees that they'll usually choose to, the outside ones go.
And in really
stand in.
inclement weather, the ones that live outside get brought into the indoor arena, the ones that don't have
Oh,
stalls.
okay,
Yep.
all right. That sounds like a good explanation there. I know you take care of your horses. I just didn't know how you did it, so.
Sure, sure.
I know on your narrative here, you say there's living quarters in the barn. Could you kind of describe what that is and how that's used?
Sure. Right now, it's not being used, but in the event that we did want some full-time help, it would always be nice to have that as an option. But upstairs, there is a usable kitchen, and it's pretty much an open concept area with a...
Yeah, it's about a 1,500 square foot apartment, shower, toilet, full bath, bedroom, full kitchen. It's above the shop. If you look at the drawing, it's second level. It's above the shop and lounge.
And then that would be primarily used by either a family member or if you would hire an employee, is that the
Correct,
thinking?
correct.
Would it be a
Right.
rental unit?
No, not really a rental. I don't think my parents would ever allow anyone outside. But, you know, if, for instance, my sister and I both live in Wisconsin right now, and it would be my goal to move back, possibly near. So if I sold my house and was interim, I would like it to be an option to be able to live up there. Or, you know, Julie as well.
When was that area developed?
What's that?
When was that area developed or built?
Essentially, after the fire, and my parents needed a place to go, they had the option to, we could have rented them a great place anywhere we wanted to on the insurance dime, but we could not get my dad to leave the farm. He was adamant, so we knocked it out and made it a place so that they could stay on the farm and keep looking after things.
So then was a septic permit gotten then to take care of that?
Yeah, that was the old.
Excuse me, we
Larry's
need,
gotta come up and
we need to be at the mic if we're gonna.
Larry Lanoux, and yes, it's got an old, it's a full, we use the existing well and septic from the home.
I'm sorry, we
So-
changed the time. I was trying to figure out where the apartment was in these two.
If you look where the shop area is, it's simply right
I can
above the
point
shop.
at this to you. So,
You're the one
It's,
like
it's
that.
a,
Sure. Thanks.
Actually, if you could flip to the PowerPoint, I've got it right here. That probably helps.
Okay. I don't know how to use PowerPoint on this
No,
one.
I've got it.
Oh, okay. Okay,
It's not the
so
shop, it's just where you see the aisleway.
It's above the shop.
Nope,
it's above.
not above the shop. It's
Okay.
above the aisleway and where it says the visitor lounge.
Okay, so like
Yep,
It's right there. It's
aisleway
that
and
area right
Byram,
there.
it's that exact area,
Okay.
just one level up.
So you're tied into the septic system for the house?
No, it's got an existing tank that was installed by a licensed contractor, and that was done years ago.
Years ago, when the barn was built.
Because there were,
Because I had a simple toilet out there. I wanted to have a little bit more than the city hall had. So it's got it was put in for 8 toilets.
okay, so there's septic permit and everything gotten for that.
Yeah.
Larry.
Well, I had a contractor take it, so I assume he has a permit, yes.
Larry, could you
Yep.
just speak to make sure that we get it on?
No, it was simply put in years ago so that the customers had a usable toilet. And that's what it is. It's probably I don't know the size of it, but it was done by a licensed contractor.
And those all get filed at the Washington County, I assume?
I don't know, I have no idea. I hired a contractor, so I assume yes.
Okay.
Any question? How many tons of hay per horse do you buy during a year's time?
How many tons of hay? Gosh, I don't know, but I'll tell you on average, each horse eats half a bale of hay a day.
Half a bale.
1/2 bale per day. So if you want to do the math, I'm certainly not good at it in my head.
What are your class sizes when you're training?
My class sizes when I'm training actually aren't that huge. A lot of training facilities will pack a lot in, but I don't like to just have them go around in a circle. So on average, I'm teaching about 4 at a time.
Okay. So it's not a lot of extra traffic?
No, it's not a lot. It doesn't mean there can't be some boarders. We do allow boarders to ride at the same time and stuff, but the indoor arena is quite small, so in the wintertime it's smaller. Summer days it might be a little bit busier at the barn, but I'd say your sizes are about the same.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I just would like to make a comment, looking at your top view of your farm. I'm impressed how it's so neatly laid out, and granted, this is from a long ways up. It looks like you run a very neat and organized operation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question for Larry. I know you have the boarding horses, horse
Yep.
riding training and so on.
Yep.
Did you have any interest in the electrical business being as part of the CUP?
Oh, my interest in the electrical is getting done. I'm 66 years old. Okay?
You ready to stop?
So, yeah, I'd like to be done with continuing education classes, and I have no employees. So you see, I climbed 40-foot telephone poles myself yet, so my goal, it's simple. I mean, I moved out into here. I established grandfather rights prior to building out here. Home occupation was not only, it was encouraged. Look at our home occupation we have in our community. You go around our complete community and see how much we have. That's why we moved out here. That's why Grant is Grant. That is very important to all these out here. I don't have employees come in and out of there. If I need an employee, occasionally my wife will help me on a job. It's that simple. So we don't have a big footprint.
Boy, you're in big trouble.
She's my #1 employee. And my daughters do it, and I have what you call a legacy farm. You're not going to see me leaving. There's a lot of rumors says I'm out here to develop. I'm going to dispel that rumor right now. If I wanted to leave and develop, I'd be with the other 2 realtors on the board looking for bringing sewer, water, and development. I'm not. The bottom line is, I've been fighting sewer and water all along. I have what is a legacy farm. I could retire, sell tomorrow, and do very well. I choose to work till about 6 months after the dirt nap. That's my program. That's my retirement program.
Can I ask you, when they built the barn and they built it over the property line of 2 of the
Yep.
PIDs?
Yep. One of
Did it
the
cause some
questions
problems?
you're going to see that you had our mayor bring at the very first city council meeting was a letter from 1984 that said they thought I had too many horses for 10 acres. And what they did not realize at that time is that FHA only allows you to finance 10 acres. It's that simple. Otherwise, you had to go into another farm program. So we were a much friendlier community. I simply called Sheila Davis. Some of you may remember her. And Sheila says, hey, Sheila, this is what we do. I only finance and the other are on contract for deed. Hey, well, then you don't have to come in. You don't have to do anything. I don't know where that documentation was that said I was not required to get one. But I did establish my grandfather rights. That's been proven in court. I didn't agree with the judge's decision, but rather than cost the city lots of money in court appealing, I simply applied for my conditional use permit. It's about 10% of the cost. The reason I stand up here and fought for the grandfather rights, and I fought for the people in home occupation that came out here, is I believe without those grandfather rights, we will be the next Woodbury, Willarney, or the next Lake Elmo. That's why I stand up and fight for the other people's rights. It's been at a great cost, and I do not appreciate when our mayor came and brought it to the very first city council meeting and held it up.
All right, let's
Any
stay
other
on
good
topic.
questions?
We gotta stay on
That's pretty
topic.
good.
I am concerned about the PIDs. I think that's gonna come up again. The property line with the barns on 2 lots,
Yep.
and with 2 different PIDs and the building straddling the line.
Is that something that,
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that's actually not uncommon in the community where we have a property owner who owns multiple PIDs for whatever reason. I mean, there are several reasons as to why that can happen, whether it's a financing piece or whether it has to do with somebody collected a few different parcels and didn't go through the process of a combination. The way that it's addressed with respect to a conditional use permit is simply that a CUP runs with the land. So the CUP and the permit and whatever approval happens just has to be recorded against all 3 PIDs. But there's no issue with respect to
Okay.
the way it can be handled if there's concern, which I fully understand from the standpoint of if those parcels were to be separated, it might cause a building, for example, to become then non-compliant with the city's ordinances. So it's simply put in the conditions of approval that the parcels cannot be sold independently of each other, and then it's recorded against all 3 parcels.
Okay.
That's not uncommon, and we have several situations.
Well, I was thinking that sometimes when things are on a line like that, it does cause problems later. And so the thought was maybe if it needed to be corrected, this would be the time.
thank you, Jennifer.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Larry, for your
Yep.
report.
You guys want to say anything else?
I'm not sure that we have a whole lot, but we do have a lot of supporters that are here to kind of let you guys know what they think about our business. And I don't know, John, do you want to come up and talk about?
Well,
wait,
open it up.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm good then. If you guys don't have any more questions, I don't have anything further to say.
You guys have any more questions for?
You get the
I
answer
think
one
I'm kind of,
before.
done.
I'm good.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, I'll need a motion for the public hearing?
I'd like to make a motion to open for public input.
I'll second that.
All in favor of opening the public hearing? Say aye. All opposed? All right, the public hearing is open, 8:25. If you do come up and speak, we do ask that you sign in. And there is a piece of, is there? Yeah, there's a piece of paper off to the side.
Yes.
Sign in?
Yes, please.
Oh,
We don't know your name, Jack.
you do?
Okay.
This is not going against my time.
I'm sorry, I guess your name is John?
Jack Smith.
Oh, Jack Smith, sorry.
Do you mind if I turn this light off?
Not at all. Maybe a button on the front real close to you. There you go.
Okay, and you mind if I turn this down so so you can get a good
Now
view
we
of
have
me
to
and I
look
get a
at you,
good
too.
view of you? Yeah. My name, I'm sure most of you would know, is John Smith. I live at 10244 67th Lane in the city of Grant. I have resided that residence since 1981, and that is some 30-plus years of residency here. I come here tonight to speak on behalf of my good friends, the Lanoux, Larry and Maureen, in their pursuit of a conditional use permit for Lanoux Stables. I would like to give a brief background of what has taken place over the last 2.5 years in this matter. And I think it's important, particularly for the audience, to understand some of this background so that you have a flavor for why this process took 2.5 years, or is taking 2.5 years. At the outset, this matter began during a city council meeting with an adversarial accusation with no forewarning, subsequent to Councilman Lanoux being sworn into office. The city's complaint policy and procedures were not followed. Had they been followed, the route to where we are today would have been a much different path. In the process in that meeting, then Councilman Huber held up.
I have to jump in here. You can't. This is just talking about what you think about the property.
I am talking about the background.
We don't want to hear about the past. I'm sorry. We want to talk about what you're saying about the conditional use permit and what you think about going forward. Not what happened 3, 5, 10, 20, I don't care how many years ago. I'm sorry. We got to stay on topic. Okay?
Excuse me, I would defer to the city attorney to give me direction as to the statute regarding public comment and hearings.
3 minutes are up. Jack, would you please understand one thing? We want to give Larry Lanoux a CUP.
Pardon me?
We want to give.
Would you repeat that again? I didn't quite hear. Now, I'm 83 years old and I don't hear quite well. Would you repeat that for me?
But I will re-emphasize it.
Let me ask, are you in concert with the rest of the commission?
Certainly.
Are you in concert with the rest of the commission with that position?
Of course I am.
Oh, well, then we reached a very, very favorable position here.
This isn't a fight between people. This is a looking at the facts, weighing them, making a recommendation to our city council, and they do the voting.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your support for the Lanoux conditional use permit.
He runs a very beautiful operation out there. We are in favor of trying to get him a CUP.
Well, that's very fine. I'm going to skip over a few things here.
Thank you.
I would like to say about the property, and it has been noted here, that the buildings and ground are in unobstructed view to the public, and there is no operational secrecy that takes place on this property. Access to this property is open to the public. It is well maintained in all of its structural and landscape aspects. In the years and months since that time that this contest was initiated, it has been dragged through the courts through considerable cost both to the city and to the Lanoux. And I think it is noteworthy that in the last court hearing, which I attended, the city asked the court to financially penalize and imprison the Lanoux for noncompliance.
I think we're getting off topic. here again. We're at the 3-minute
Yeah, we are
line,
at
so
3 minutes.
It's not relevant to our discussion, I would say that, but to our topic.
It's relative to your decision.
To your political position.
But the conditional use permit the court said to the city attorney and planner that the city's processing of the conditional use permit application were inconsistent and that the city failed to establish any contempt of court by the Lanoux. I think that's important because this is all the process that they have been going through to obtain their conditional use permit. And this is what,
Thank you for your comment. Your time is up. I'm sorry.
we have a timer?
We do. It's 3 minutes. I have my timer up.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Jack Smith.
I'll fill that out later. Hello, Greens Commission. Thank you for taking the time. My name is John Engstrom, and I am a local veterinarian from Stillwater Equine, and I have been working with and for the Lanoux and now their daughters for 21 years. I believe it's been 21 years. And what I have seen as things have changed at their farm, as it went from a hobby farm where the girls learned and developed their passion to now their place of business, is that it's really maintained the flavor that I think most rural communities would like to have. I have a similar conditional use permit actually in my hometown in Richmond, Wisconsin, where I've actually was received the similar grazing rights as far as about 2 or 3 horses per acreage. So that was something that's very similar in other communities as far as horse density wise goes. But it was interesting in getting my own conditional use permit that the flavor of the entire community was considered. They wanted our land to be maintained agricultural, even though sometimes horse boarding is perceived as a commercial enterprise, which I'm not sure I totally agree with. But it does have, like I say, the flair, and it brings in people in the community to earn their living, you know, with and off the land and working together. So, and that's what they promote in their area. As far as a couple questions that were brought up in the earlier discussion, it takes approximately 20 pounds of hay for a 1,000-pound animal unit during the winter to sustain that. And also, as far as shelters goes, I was involved in a court case about 9-10 years ago that I believe trees were established as a form of shelter, that it was actually put in the state statute for boarding and shelter for horses. And being a veterinarian, do you have any questions for me as far as health? Their horses are very well cared for. It's their business. You know, their customers pay them to take care of their horses, so it's in everybody's best interest to have well-kept horses. That's how they maintain their clientele, and I think they maintain average relationships longer than most barns in the area, to tell you the truth, much longer. Any other questions?
I think you already answered it.
Yeah. If there's anything else, right at Stillwater Equine, and I'll put my number down as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Lauren Sitterstrom.
Lauren Sitterstrom, 9330 107th, and I have a conditional use permit with a horse boarding operation called Gateway Stables, and I vertically integrate, and I'm near organic. And I also, what I wanted to show you is I also have 2 property ID numbers, because I have 2 20-acre parcels. So that's quite a common element. And I'm aware of someone down the road real close to me that has like 15 or 30 acres, and they have their CUP allows them to have, 69 horses, 15 goats, and 6 dogs or something. So it's it was quite interesting. And I do also want to attest that this is a first-class operation. I mean, we have a number of different barns, but they take excellent care of their horses. They have quality people there. So and there's not a problem. You know, I mean, you don't see horses running loose. there's not issues that way. I know I've worked with the sheriff a number of times when there's been loose horses, and I've held them for them, you know. So I am somewhat familiar with the horse community. I've sold a few people some hay and whatnot. But like I said, this is sustainable agriculture, and this is what keeps Grant what it is, you know. And there's been some babbling about green acres. Well, the thing is, you have to realize you don't have to have probation officers, social workers for horses. People, yes, horses, no. So they don't require a lot of social services. So while it also contributes, all that grass and whatever puts more oxygen back in the air, gets rid of the carbon dioxide. So it does, in fact, promote a healthier environment for all of us. So that's something positive to think about, you know. So, like I said, it's a Class 1 operation. He's been around for a long, long time. So I would certainly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Good evening, Commission members.
Good evening.
My name is Morgan Sexy, and I am a client of Lanoux Stables, and Jamie Muller is my horse trainer. I have a Bachelor of Science in Animal Science from the University of Minnesota, where I've been involved in the Extension Service, and I also have a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, and I am a neuro-ICU step-down nurse at a downtown St. Paul hospital, where I currently work, but my passion has always been in horses. So I've been involved in Washington County horse community since I was about 10 years old. Grew up showing at the Washington County Fair every single year. I'm very involved. I feel like it has taught me a lot of the skills to become the successful young professional that I am today. I was originally brought to Lanoux Stables, as you can see by that picture that is hanging on your wall, because of their success. I did not know them, but I'm a competitive person, and I wanted to be successful with my own horse showing competitions. Jamie's clients were winning. As you can see, that picture is from the largest horse show in the Midwest as far as number of competitors. Her clients got first, second, and third out of hundreds of competitors, all girls that she taught to ride and horses that she trained. I was instantly drawn to them, and while I was in high school with my own horse, I had great success with her as my trainer. When I graduated high school and went to the University of Minnesota, I originally joined the equestrian team there. After 2 years, I was elected captain, and the team was not doing well. Out of a Midwest region, the team usually did not place. We really didn't get any sort of recognition. Once again, being a competitive person, I went to Jamie and Larry and asked if we could, have them as a coach. And within the first year of Jamie and Lanoux Stables helping us out, we went from being a team that never placed to being the reserve regional champion team. In turn, getting attention from sponsors to help the University of Minnesota students receive funding so that they could participate and show horses. Something that, unfortunately, not a ton of kids get to do these days. It is an expensive hobby, and the University of Minnesota equestrian team allows them to have that opportunity to be involved and show horses. So that has been something that has been an announcing success, and we've gotten a lot of publicity for that, including Grant Township. I actually, Lauren Cedarstrom's show, I was interviewed a couple years ago, getting the word out about Grant Township and the wonderful operation that we've been running here. So I also wanted to speak about the University of Minnesota equestrian team being a good advocate for Grant Township. We have multiple years volunteered for the Grant Tractor Parade, selling raffle tickets for the community, and also participating in the float. I think it's a blast. It's super fun. We come by this street, and the University of Minnesota has been involved in that as well. I also wanted to speak about the Minnesota Hoofed Animal Rescue. I know I'm a talker. Jamie and Julie have both been involved in the Minnesota Hoofed Animal Rescue and have been fostering and training horses.
And I'd like to give you the comparison pictures of what.
Oh, of Rio?
Well, that and
Oh, and Edison?
and see what we do.
Oh.
Could we turn this light on, projector?
Maybe the next person will show these pictures.
Yeah, you are. I'd love to have you, but you are over.
Sure.
So
All right. Thank you guys
Thank you very much for the
consideration.
comments. You
I
did a very
appreciate it.
nice job.
She can do it. Right in front of you.
How do I do it?
We have to put that up first.
Being a millennial, I'm not very technologically savvy. So.
Go fix it, Jack, you record.
Yeah.
I was like, he seemed like he no, wrong
Could
one.
you state your name, please?
Hi, I'm Madeline Arbeiter.
did you sign in?
I did.
Thank you.
Need the light on.
There it is.
Wild guess. All right, good evening. My name is Madeline Arbeiter, and I'm the captain of the University of Minnesota equestrian team, and I'm here on behalf of the team. Our home barn is Lanoux Stables, and I grew up as an inner city kid in North Minneapolis, and I did not have horses at my commodity, at my reach. And coming to the University of Minnesota, I had dabbled in horseback riding, but until I joined the team, I hadn't really found my passion for it until I got to work with Jamie and Julie and be a part of this family that we have at Lanoux Stables. I think I can say that at Lanoux Stables, not only do we excel as riders, but we excel as individuals. I have had my fair share of ups and downs in high school and being a teenage girl, and I have found that I find my best self at the barn, and I find my ability to be who I am at the barn and with the family that I have there. As you can see, I keep calling Lanoux Stables a family because it is. Lanoux Stables is a second home to me. I had moved around. I moved to a new city when I was in high school. Can you imagine? It was horrible. But I had something as amazing as this. I found a family, and they welcomed me with open arms, and it became a home. And to have a home, you have to have a strong base. And Larry and Maureen provided that for me, and so did Julie and Jamie. And I'm so incredibly honored to say that I ride with them, and then that I got to grow up riding with them, and that I get to not only work with riding for them, but ride for the University of Minnesota team as my coaches, and Lanoux Stables being my barn, and it being owned by Larry and Maureen here in Grant. As a college girl, I love my coffee, and I love going out to eat. And one of the great things that we riders get to do for the team is after our lessons, we go out to eat, and we bring in, I would say, quite a bit of your Starbucks and Caribou money here. And Lanoux Stables is an amazing place, and being someone who grew up with the difficulties I've had, and being to grow as myself there, and seeing my riders from school grow as individuals, and seeing someone from our team who maybe is less vocal to being interactive with everyone, and going out and riding in front of people at shows, and growing into that person because of what Lanoux Stables and Julie and Jamie and Larry and Maureen provide for us, is something that's pretty incredible. I think it's absolutely amazing. I truly believe that I have been positively impacted. Camera on me, please.
There we go.
I truly believe that Lanoux Stables is a second home to me. School is just where I reside at the U of M, but I come out to the barn quite a few times a week because that's where I want to be, and that's what gives me who I am, and that's truly what helps me get through day by day. In high school, I was diagnosed with depression, and horses have given me that ability to be able to overcome that, and going off to college was scary, but they provided such a wonderful home, and I couldn't be more grateful.
You're doing great.
So I hope you take that into consideration, looking at many other young adults like me and what you can provide for your city with them.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peggy Vandreet, and I live on 9293 Keswick, which is down the block. And we've been there 10 years, and we're one of the people, because, especially since we live towards 96, that would be directly affected pretty much by activities down there. And I must say, we've been there 10 years. I'm retired. Our windows are always open, so I generally see most everything going down and up the street. I'm outside. Some might even say I'm nosy, but I have never experienced any problems at all living relatively close to the street. And I somewhat know Lanoux. They're good people. I find horse people in general make good neighbors. They help each other. They help build communities. I hate public speaking. And So anyway, I'm here to support him and what he does. My daughter worked down there a few years ago. It's a first-class operation. I also think with all the new developments, or the new development, that it's important if we want to keep Grant rural to add horse places and support the rural community as well. Keswick is kind of a horsey walk. I think more people than not have horses, and it's a perfect place to have that set up. We all help each other and look out for each other. And so I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just gotta get my glasses so I can sign my name.
Take mine off.
Don't wait for me, I'll get out of your way.
When does the clock start? I don't know.
After you sign your name,
Oh,
you
so I
start
have
talking.
3 more minutes?
My name's Lisa Paddock, 10025 Keswick Avenue. I received the letter, being very close neighbors, on the public hearing for the Lanoux Ranch CUP application. And just one general observation I made with the letter is that this isn't a business startup for a CUP. This is a 30-year business that has been successfully, responsibly run. And so you don't have the risk like you do with the solar panels and a startup organization. This is well established here. As background, our family, we moved in on Grant on Keswick in 2004. We've lived here 13 years. And we really enjoy Larry and Maureen as neighbors and as friends. I find it's a beautiful ranch, responsible business owners. Early on in 2005, our daughter signed up for lessons at the Lanoux Ranch, and I loved it because we didn't have to have buildings on our property for horses. We sent her down the road, and it was a beautiful place. I was there often with my daughter, and I observed a lot of young kids, young adults, being trained with horse riding lessons in a very safe, responsible way. And for many young kids, this is their only exposure to country rural living. And this is a real gem of a ranch that gives young kids and young adults opportunities that otherwise they wouldn't have, such as a 4-H experience we have right here in Grant at the Lanoux Ranch. I also have observed over the years living on Keswick that the Lanouxs are very helpful neighbors, and Larry has reached out in many ways to help neighbors. For example, I came home one afternoon and he was up to his thighs in mud and water helping a neighbor with a flooded ditch that needed to be dredged out. And I think that was for about a day and a half you helped that neighbor just as something that he wanted to do to be helpful. Also, Larry responded, and a neighbor told me this, I don't know if you know, I know, to a 3 a.m. phone call in the winter from a neighbor on an icy road slid in the ditch. She didn't know who to call, no one to call. She called Larry, he responded, pulling her out of the ditch at 3 in the morning. For my family, we were snowed in 48 hours for a bad snowstorm. We have a 900-foot driveway. No snowplows would come and help us. It was too much snow. We called Larry, and he was there with a commercial-grade snowplow, and he's come 10 to 12 times since then. Random Christmas caroling, hosting and organizing numerous progressive dinners and bonfires. Larry and Maureen have been supportive in helping neighbors, and together with their daughters run a responsible professional ranch. Overall, our family offers enthusiastic support for the Lanoux conditional use permit.
Thank you, Lisa.
I know who I'm gonna call next time I get stuck in the ditch.
Sign first or talk first? Whatever.
Sign first.
Okay.
Anyway, Commissioners, thank you for the time to talk. I'm not a big horse lover. First my name is Jim Frick. I live on 11610 Greenleaf Avenue North, real close to the new hockey facility and that, so just wanted to bring that up. I'm not a horse lover. I don't disagree with horse lovers. I like them, but I don't know anything about horses. And I'm not here because Larry Lanoux is my best friend or anything like that. My concern is basically what I see is the rules that seem to apply differently for different people. Again, I'll reference, and since I know you guys aren't the city council, but you are the planning commission, and you probably recommend and have some say in the process of issuing CUPs. I've got a fellow that right across me has built this wonderful hockey arena, built this big home, has nothing, yeah, I understand, Bob, let me finish. I'm gonna tie it into this, okay? Went through what, basically, no CUP needed, nothing. Here's a guy that's been in business for all these years, and all of a sudden, I don't even know why the hell he needs a CUP, to be real honest. I think I know the reason. I'm not going to fool anybody here. But all I would ask you guys would be, just in the name of fairness, throw the politics aside and issue this man the CUP. Again, I don't even know why he needs it. I'm frankly getting... I'm so... is my 3 minutes up, sir?
No, I'd just like to say that if you have more than 10 horses, you need a CUP.
Okay. You know what? I'll believe it when I see it. I've seen it. Like I say, I am so frustrated. Me and my wife, we've been out here 21 years. I'm in a kind of a bind right now. My dad just passed away a couple days ago. He's a decorated Marine vet on Iwo Jima, wounded. So I'm a little bit hassled, but I'm really hassled with the fact that I even have to be here because of this. Let's be fair. Throw the politics away. Come on, guys. It's a challenge. Take it.
Good evening. My name is Josie Hoker, and I live at 9899 Keswick. We are my husband and I and our 6 children have been living at that location for the past 22 years. It is directly adjacent to Larry and Maureen's land. And they've been good friends for us. I have enjoyed looking at their horses for years. It has been a joy. I do have some concerns that my husband has already voiced with Larry, and some of it was brought up tonight that kind of concerned me even more, was that most of the time they have right around 25 to 30 horses, and we're talking about doubling that amount. Currently we have the manure that they generate is put on the back corner of their property, which butts right up against ours. I'm concerned about the groundwater that is coming, from that. If that doubles, what will they be doing with that? We did a water restoration project when we first moved in, and we have a pond toward the back of our property. By the summertime, it's completely green now, and I'm concerned that the runoff from Larry's property is affecting that, and I just don't know what the increased number of horses will do for that. I think we're probably the most directly affected by the farm because of how it drains. When we have when there's a very, very large rainstorm, there are times when you can't walk to the back of our property because the water is draining off of Larry's into our pond, which drains further north of us. He's been very good in the past. I'm just concerned, and I'm voicing that concern because of the number of horses that we're talking about. Also, just voicing also concern about the fencing. When you've got that many horses. Once in a while we have horses in our backyard, and it hasn't been a problem. They've always come and gotten them, but it just kind of scares me with the number, that plus the fact that we're also, my husband and I are, discussed about this, he would be here tonight, but he's out of state, that the feedlot that he had to apply for, how does that, the fact that we now live next door to a feedlot, how is that going to affect our property values? I mean, I wish he hadn't even had to apply for that. I wish he could turn it back in, because the idea that there's a feedlot next to my house is
The distinction
concerning.
though is not a commercial feedlot, it's just a feedlot for the purposes of maintaining.
But would a person going to buy a home have that, know the difference? That's the other thing. So I'm just worried, concerned about smell from the manure, and the water runoff, and just that we're the ones that are being affected the most. And I'm not saying that I'm against his CUP, I'm just not. I just want these items addressed. And I appreciate them being wonderful neighbors all these years, and I would love to continue our relationship on that level, but I just want some of these items to be corrected.
Thank you, Josie.
Thank you. Can I just say one other thing? And when they were talking about lighting, right now it's very dark out by us, and I don't know if you're talking about adding lighting because of the horses. I don't know. Okay.
Well, hey, we got it.
So I just would like that
Okay,
addressed.
all right,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, my name is Sarah Kilgriff. I'm a resident of Washington County. I'm familiar with Lanoux Stables. I also professionally work as the manager of the Land and Air Compliance section for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. First of all, I'd like to thank you for doing the due diligence on researching the feedlot rules. Minnesota Rule Chapter 7020 governs the application for and issuance of permits and construction of operation animal feedlots and manure storage facilities. The rule does go on to say in its definitions that it does not apply or regulate pasture-only operations. Pastures are further defined as areas where grass or other growing plants are used for grazing and where concentration of animals is such that a vegetative cover is maintained during the growing season, except in the immediate vicinity of temporary supplemental feeding or watering devices. So I understand that you talked to staff today, and of course we always appreciate people to register businesses, but I would argue that this operation technically is not a feedlot. It is a pasture. So therefore I would feel that the agency would not have much bearing to be able to regulate any feedlot requirements on this facility. If it's just a registration, fine, it is what it is, but technically I would disagree with the assessment that this should be considered a feedlot. I'd also like to further state that, as I mentioned, I'm familiar with the operation, and in my professional opinion, Lanoux maintain the property in an environmentally friendly fashion. They manage the manure well, and I've never seen anything there that concerns me environmentally. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What was your name again?
What's that?
What was your name again?
Kilgriff, Sarah Kilgriff, Kilgriff.
My name's John Podgoric, and I live in Washington County as well. And my daughter is actually one of the daughters up there in that picture. And 15 years ago, she's now about 25, was afraid of dogs until she showed up here. I'm not big with words, but I see a great family. I don't call it a business, because I have 3 horses there. It's, bringing my family there. We've raised our family here. We've spent numerous hours here. We spend weekends together. We get calls when we got to put blankets on the horses. It's a huge deal. My daughter's a nurse. My other daughter's got a health degree. They've become great from little kids to young adults through everything you've taught them and you've taught them, which has been huge. So I look at something like this as going, it's not broken. What's there to fix? Let them have it. Or find me a place for 3 horses.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peggy Roytek. I'm 9900 Keswick Avenue North, and I'm just a couple doors north of the Lanoux. And I just had a couple of quick comments. For the most part, they have a lovely facility, lovely place. I have a bit of concern jumping the number of horses they have, basically doubling it in the area, the pasture area, just from a manure standpoint, and flies and things that I have noticed an increase in. So that is one thing. It's just that their operation itself is lovely, and I think that you should definitely approve a use permit. But I have a concern of the increase in volume. And a second thing I just wanted to address was I walk our road every day, sometimes twice a day, and I notice there's a lot of traffic coming and going to their appointments for training, and I just would like, I'm concerned about the increase in volume of traffic coming up and down the road, and if there's a way to for the business to inform the people to slow down, because I mean there are points in time where I feel my safety walking along the roadside. I try to get off the best I can, but I feel like there's a bit of a safety issue. So if you could put up some kind of instruction with the people that come and go, that to take heed to the people walking on the road, that would be appreciated. And lastly, I don't even know what the ordinances are regarding signage. If you have a sign, that's great. You have a business. My only request is that you don't have a neon sign, because that would be an eyesore, or big bright sign, electronic sign. I'm hoping there's ordinance that says you can't. If there's a nice regular sign, that's cool by me. Just no big bright lights, because we live out in the country. We love the rural nature, the darkness out there at night. It's just the sky's beautiful, and I don't want it ruined by a big neon sign. So that's all I have to say.
We could use another bar.
I'm sorry?
So we could use another bar in town.
Yeah.
If Larry wanted to open.
Otherwise, they have a great operation.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dick Donahue. I live in Kelman Court. I've known Larry and Maureen for many years. I've been out here since the middle 70s. And all these years, we used to drive down Keswick a lot. Now we still do, because it's about comparable to Joliet Avenue. But in any event, their operation's always been neat, clean. I've been to the premises. Their fences are well maintained. They've been great neighbors over the years. We see them occasionally. And interestingly, I've never heard a complaint from anybody. Everybody likes them. Everybody likes the operation. I know kids in our neighborhood who've been there. Never do you hear a complaint. The only complaint that ever emanated came out of the city council when he was elected. But I'm not going to go into those details. This is one of those things you almost wonder why we're even having a hearing, because they've been around for, 25, 30 years without complaint. But here's where we are today. We've got a CUP. It makes sense. I urge you, let's get it recommended to the city council. Let's get this sad chapter behind us. Let's get the CUP granted, and we can all go home and live in Grant the way we want to live. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Chris Zwetler. Live with my wife Julie directly across the street from the Lanoux, and just want to be on the record that we support the permit.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
I like how brief you are. And we got the point.
My name is Rich Lohman. Rich Lohman. I've been shoeing horses for the Lanoux family for the last 20 years, like John. So, loyalty is something that those guys know much about. You guys wanted facts. The facts are, you see these kids go to this farm. The Podgorics are a perfect example. You see these kids grow up and be successful human beings and productive people in our society. They're out riding horses, they're having fun. They talk about, they're afraid of doubling the operation. I've been doing like anywhere from 30 to 50 horses for the last, 10, 15 years. So it's not doubling it. They're already there. Larry and Maureen and Julie and Jamie, they will, they're modest people, and they'll sit there and they'll tell you that they're trying to save their business, and they are. They want to make a living and they want to do well. The thing they don't tell you is what they care about is these kids. These kids that they have. I've seen these kids, and they're, doctors and teachers. I mean, they're little kids, and now these little kids, they're having kids, and where they are? They're at the Lanoux Stable riding horses, So what does that tell you? They're going back there. I mean, it is a class act operation, And that one was talking about Larry doing. I mean, I've heard a million people talk, well, that's an over-exaggeration, but a lot of people talk about what Larry, and he don't tell anybody about that stuff, And I hear these things that go on, and I'm like, I don't get it, And, I mean, this guy was talking about, I can't remember what he was saying. Anyway, I was on a train of thought. But anyway, when these kids as kids start going, I mean, that tells you something, It tells you that they're learning and they have respect for this family, And it's, I mean, for me, it's like I look at this family and I think, the part of what they're looking at is these kids, because they love these kids. They're not just kids that come in and ride horses to them. They're part of their family, and it's, they're wonderful people. All right, thank you.
Oh, it's 3 minutes. I just want you to know
Okay.
that right now.
So give them the damn thing, though.
Can I give him my extra time?
Thanks, Rich.
How you doing, gentlemen? My name is Gary Throne, and I am friends with the Lanouxs, and I have two daughters that each have a horse out at the stable, and I'll tell you, it's the greatest thing ever for them. All summer long, and you know how kids are today with phones and TVs, they basically, from morning till night, they're at the farm hanging out with the horses and dogs and everything else, so it's a great operation, so let's make it happen, huh? Oh, yeah, how do they do it?
You put it on your chest.
Well, anyway, can I come up here? Here.
Sure.
That's my daughter's horse.
Okay.
Can you put that on the screen for the public, if this doesn't get broadcast?
Sure,
Can
go
you
ahead.
put the screen back
Yeah.
up?
Put the, put them up there.
How do I do it?
Can you put those under the camera there?
Where is it, Larry?
You can look up here and see where you're at. There you
Hi.
go. That's your daughter's horse?
That, yep, before Jamie and Morgan rescued her, and there she is today.
All right.
So the lady who stopped him actually got prosecuted, so.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I don't know who. Oh, there's one too.
Let me help you here. This is them as they got this horse. Here's a picture from the Hoofed Animal Rescue. This horse had to be stood up against the wall to have its picture taken. That's how bad it was. The other horses that came in passed away. This is a picture of that same horse winning the Hoofed Animal Rescue. Right now, that's how it gets redone. And we have many of those stories of Hoofed Animal Rescues. We are the most successful barn. They send the most to us. And if they have a problem animal, we take care of them.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. And I have 4,000 pictures on my phone if anybody wants to.
Good evening, Commission. I'm Bob Zick, Insight News Hour. And Larry actually asked me to be gentle on you people.
Thank you, Larry.
I'm going to start out by saying yesterday I had an hour and a half conversation with the Washington County Sheriff, Sheriff Dan Starry, about the conduction of public meetings. And so with your city attorney here, I want to say that when Jack Smith was up here, you can limit the time, you cannot limit the content. So just be aware of that.
That's
and
nonsense.
if you need to, ask your city attorney. Now, a couple things with Bob Tufke indicating that the consensus is that this is going to go forward. I'm going to curtail some of my comments about the politics of this particular CUP application. In doing the news hour, I've sat in on a lot of conditional use permit processes. I will just quickly say that, and I've been out to that Larry's place many times. And, there was a couple concerns raised here that, is legitimate to bring before the commission. One was the concern about the speed on that road. Well, that road is bumpy and gravel. That road, when I drive it, I'm not driving fast. The conditions of that road limit the speed on that road. Now, also the issue came up about manure. They don't call it horse apples for nothing. This isn't cow manure or pig manure. Horse manure doesn't propagate like cow manure when it rains, or pig manure when you hear the environmentalist or the MPCA talk about the methane gas and stuff that comes off of it. Horse manure is a very manageable manure. So I just bring that up, and for the other comments that I was going to bring up, I'm going to save those. We do a television show tomorrow night, and we'll discuss this process there. But I commend the commission for having this public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Any other speakers?
Just when I should be addressing the comments or the concerns of the neighbor?
Well, what we'll do is we'll close the public comments, and then you can jump in. Anybody else that needs to?
Am I allowed to say one more thing?
Sure.
Please? Is that allowed? Yeah, it's allowed. It'll be really quick.
Okay, it should be really quick.
2 comments. If you
Well,
have
she
a
was
daughter,
over before. That's what-
please think about that and addressing the speed concern. I'm a 20-year-old with a lead foot, and I love horses, and any girl who goes out to the barn loves horses, and we know to drive safely and slow.
Thank you.
Kim, did you have something else?
Yeah, Chair and Commissioners, I had a resident that sent me some comments. She was unable to be here tonight. Kim Erickson at 9600 Keswick Avenue. She said the only issue I have with the owners at 9700 Keswick Avenue is the amount of manure that causes a lot of biting flies. If a plan of removal is able to be put together for regular cleaning up and adequate disposal, I have no other complaint. They are a wonderful family and great neighbors. So that'll be part of the public record.
Okay, thank you. Is that it for the public comments? And I guess
I
we,
make a motion, we close public comments.
I will second that. Sorry.
all in favor of closing the public comment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, public comments are now closed. Would you like to address some of those concerns that you heard? Oh,
Oh, Mr. Chair, members
Yes.
of the commission, before Mr. Lanoux speaks, I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarification regarding a couple of the items that came up specifically related to the feedlot registration. So I want to make the clarification for folks watching at home and those in the audience that feedlot registration is different than receiving a feedlot permit. If they had reached the threshold that they needed a permit, they would have required the number of animal units to be significantly higher than what was being proposed. So all they did was simply a registration. So that does not qualify them as a feedlot. What it does is it just allows the MPCA to kind of know where animal units are located and in what quantities and in what locations. But that's different than the feedlot permit. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. There was no feedlot permit required in this application. So about concerns related to, property values of adjacent properties or whether or not that negatively impacts them, it would not fall under that category. So I just want to make sure that that's clear for everybody, that it was really just a registration, it's not a permit. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
thank you. Okay.
Larry Lanoux, back up. I want to address, and I appreciate the neighbors coming up. They do have concerns. Some said they are a little concerned about flies and stuff. Well, we are in Grant. We are in the country. The one neighbor that wrote a letter, she has horses in her backyard. The flies could have come from there. I do want to mention that in Josie's concerns, whether she realized it or not, Rich can tell you, I've typically had 50 to 60 horses out there all the time. You probably see the ones on the half of the pasture that are over there. We've always had and run, I don't know for how many years, roughly. So I'm not looking for an increase in numbers. We simply aren't. What we've been asked to is just simply to operate as we have since when I came out. I actually came out to Grant in 1969, work at the Speltz farm. I saved my money till I could come out here and build and do just this. I did my due diligence, so I'm not asking to increase. Some of the concern we had about the water, if you look at our manure pile that she says is bordering her property, I'm pretty careful about that. We compost it right behind the barn. One of the questions was where we compost it. It's right behind the barn. That's where we bring it out. You'll see we compost it, we turn it. Actually, we use it for part of our windbreak in the winter. And after it's composted and turned, then the manure she's talking hasn't had any fresh manure. That's probably 2-3 years old before we bring it out. And what we have out on the side is more black dirt. It's not fresh manure. And so I did take some pictures of that particular area over there. I talked to her husband. Jeff was very good. Just always very good. He calls me if we got an issue. I try to take care of him right away. If he needs help, we help him out. So I've got great neighbors. You've seen, and I want to thank all my neighbors for coming out here in support. That is why I fight so hard for Grant. You and I might think we fight at different paces, obviously, and what I stand for is a little different, but I am very cognizant of what Grant is about. That's why I say I have a legacy farm. I'm very careful about my neighbors and their deals. If you look at my fence line, I bought probably one of the best fence lines that I found on the market. I wouldn't say virtually maintenance free, but I've tipped my Bobcat over it and I can fix it and go back, and it's a lot easier to keep the electric on there. So we do it, and we are occasionally going to have animals that get out. We have kids that leave gates open. We have horses that are smarter than I am. They can open gates. And so, yes, you leave one out and some coming out, and be quite honest, you come any given day. I've got a donkey. I won't give you his name, Gary. But, yeah, he's like a lawn ornament. He's out all the time. When these kids are out there with their horses, We don't have horses that pick up their heads and go, and occasionally they do, but we get them right away as soon as they're made aware of it. We've had there's only been one complaint ever filed at the city office, and that was a confusion. They thought I owned 10 acres. Once I explained to them I had 30, it was cleared up. There was no driving force to this complaint. So I'm simply asking to be allowed to do what I've been doing before and all along. I'm very adamant. I want to see my grandkids. I know by having them and their families here 4 or 5 days a week, I'm very close to my grandkids. I'll tell you, if I should write the letter that one's from Colorado. They just came here for a week and left. They want to know if they can come to the U here and get on the U of M horse team. You know, and their dad played over there at the U. And personally, I kind of like it out in Colorado. If I didn't have family here, I probably might go out there. It's a very nice area, but I have the opportunity to go across the river. A new bridge is coming up. I have no intention of it. Like I said, I have a legacy farm. I'm simply asking for the right to do what we have since 1984. And I've been very careful not to throw my neighbors under the bus, because I know of a lot of farms, and some real recent ones, that don't have conditional use permits. And I'm not going to name them by name. Your city knows it, and the judge knows it. That's why when I was in court, she says, let's move this out of my court, let's move it into the next one, and we'll determine arbitrary and capricious. I don't want to go there. I don't really like litigation. I've been in business. I've only used the attorney once in my life, in my entire life, and I'll be 66 next month. And that was to buy the 30 acres from 3 school teachers and make sure they all got paid in a timely manner. I got on your city council. I got one on speed dial, for Christ's sake. Let's put it aside. Let's be done with this. It's costing the taxpayers a lot of money, and when it's all really done, who won out of this? Our city attorneys, probably. Thank you.
Okay. Jennifer, I have a question. I'm trying to understand, you know, we heard from a couple people saying that there's between 30 and 50 horses there now. Has there been, or is there currently a conditional use permit to get to 50 or 60 horses now?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if I understand what you're asking, there is no conditional use permit on the property today. So as with respect to what he's been doing, whether or not there's 50, 60, 20, I couldn't say, because there's no permit. So all we can do is understand what his testimony is, and if he's providing that that's how many horses have been there, then they're his operations. So it's up to you to determine whether or not that's accurate, and the neighbors have, you know, have their observations that they've provided to you during public testimony as well. So there's nothing from the perspective of the city that documents, and I did not go out and count the horses.
Oh, no, I don't mean counting horses. For example, if you don't have a conditional use permit today, what is the current zoning say for horses per acre?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, so the current ordinance, if somebody wanted to come in today and start a new operation, which is essentially how we've had to look at this. So I realize that's confusing for folks, but that's really what we've had to do, because there's no existing permit, we're reviewing, although we're reviewing an existing business, we're reviewing it for a new permit. So we're having to look at the operations and say, well, what is going on? So in terms of what's in our ordinance, we have essentially the standard of one animal unit per grazable acre, or per 2 grazable acres as a standard, and then a maximum of 10 before requiring a conditional use permit. Then there's nothing with respect to the ordinance that says, and you cannot exceed X number of horses per acre, or from a ratio perspective. There's nothing in our ordinance that says that. I did a fair amount of research with respect to Minnesota State statute, took a look at the MPCA, et cetera. There's really nothing in terms of a maximum number of horses per acre, if you will. It's really more regulated based upon the management of the facility, whether or not they're using pasture techniques, whether they're doing composting, whether it's how their manure management is. So there's guidelines with respect to how to do those things. And then there's thresholds to require a feedlot permit as opposed to registration. So there's different things that kind of get tripped in, but there's no steadfast rule that says you can't exceed, X number of horses per acre.
Right. So, for example, if somebody was have an existing place for how many years, 30 years or whatever it is, how many horses do you have to have before you start to have to submit a CUP?
10. The answer is 10.
More than 10?
Correct.
Okay. And if you don't, then you're not adhering to our zoning ordinances, or what?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that's correct. But for those of you that don't know, and then also for clarification for those in the audience, the city of Grant really operates on a complaint basis. So we don't have staff, as you all know, to go out and do enforcement. So when a complaint is filed, that's when that triggers the review, if you will, of someone's operations or their property, it's complaint based. So we don't go out and drive around looking for violations. We don't go around looking to see if somebody has, 100 horses or a building permit, or that's not, the city's staff is not capable of doing that from a capacity perspective.
Okay. Right.
If I may, you are correct. We are on a complaint-based operation. There was no formal complaint. There has never been one in my file. The one I addressed with a simple phone call when we were a friendly community, and it was addressed in 1984. The next complaint came the very night that I got put on the city council as an elected official. Mr. Huber brought the complaint, and he held it up and demanded that I be held to a higher standard. When you run for political office, I have found no statute that says you must be held to a higher standard. You must be held to the same standard. Actually, I went to Mr. Ekberg Lammers, and as they said, everybody should be treated fairly. I believe when the city council and the body here sets policy, and that's what we elect him to do, I do not believe
So
it
Larry,
is.
a couple people asked us to put politics aside, and I think you're getting into politics again.
Yep.
So, I mean.
I'm going to say that you were say we're complaint basis, but I am going to say as a council person like yourself that sets policy, I don't expect you to run around looking for violations, because I will guarantee you, if we drive up and down the road, I could bring you all kinds of them.
I don't think.
And I don't think our council people, actually, we should be writing ordinances that we shouldn't be allowed, if we're setting policy, to file formal complaints.
Oh, no.
Especially if they're not egregious.
My question was just, is there a current CUP for the 60? Because it looks like you're going from 60 to 65.
No, there was never one. What was determined in the courts, when our city took me to court, was that I indeed had grandfather rights. I will take you to other farms in Grant that have grandfather rights. They said that because I put a building up, I intensified my use. And that was a narrow interpretation of the judges. Yeah, if we could get the screen up. But that was a very narrow interpretation. Is he sleeping here, maybe?
No.
Maybe you can knock on the door?
We get a
It's
screen up?
what are you? Oh, you want the camera on you?
Well, yeah, I mean, for the people who are listening to Black Heel, it gets
Could
kind
you
of
put the camera on the speaker, please?
Yep. Could we knock on the door and see if he's awake?
Did we lose him?
Very good job, thank you. Maybe that's why we had trouble the last time. For those of you that had that, when I submitted my application, this is the application you got. I don't see any one of you with this application. I took a lot of time. It's got all your own zoning ordinance. It says 20 acres and above, you are not limited in buildings. We have other buildings that have been put up after mine, and our city's not going after them, so we're being arbitrary and capricious. So what I am saying is that...
I'm not asking about buildings. I was asking about horses.
No, that's what I'm saying. It was established by the courts. I had grandfather rights. And if we don't go after each and other building, we will be determined arbitrary and capricious, and I will guarantee you that's not the line I want to go down, and I don't believe the city wants to do it for a very good operation that's been in business.
I
We
think
have
you're
had this many
misunderstanding.
animals.
I simply asked, to Jennifer, was there an existing CUP for 60
No,
horses?
there was grandfather rights.
I don't know what that means.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I would recommend that we move on.
Yeah.
Because we have an application before you. You know what the application is. There is no conditional use permit, so this is not about judging whether or not there should have not been
Just didn't know if
grandfathers.
there was one.
So-
That's all I
So,
asked.
but all I'm saying is, we've got an application, there is not a conditional use permit that addresses 60 horses. We've got verbal testimony from the applicant that states he's had between 50 and 60 horses there at a time. We've got anecdotal comments and we need to take that information and use that to make a recommendation this evening.
Okay.
And like I said, had you been given my actual application, it had all the zoning in it, and it was highlighted in red. I don't know, did either of you get
Mr.
this
Chair, members of the
application?
commission, you received an analysis that included references to all of the not statutes,
right.
but the code sections. That application material was returned to the city attorney, and the revised information was provided to you in your packets this evening.
Thank you.
All right, I thank you again for your time, and like I said, it's a good business. It's as close to 4-H as we have in the city of Grant. Thank you.
Does anyone feel like they need more information before we make a recommendation?
Mr. Chairman, can we move on to the draft conditions?
Sure, we can do that. Draft conditions.
John, do you have a copy of the draft conditions as an applicant? I haven't seen it.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the staff report, as always, is posted on the website and available for download a week prior to. So we can certainly, I believe there's a public copy at the back. We could also put them up on the screen as well. There should be a public copy of the report this evening back there, or someone may have.
We're gonna do it.
No, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the packet is available for download online. Since there's members of the public who might be interested, would you like me to go through them? There's actually not a lot of conditions, so I'm happy to read them if that would help
Please do.
folks. All right. Proposed condition number 1, the conditional use permit shall be recorded against all 3 PIDs. I want to make sure that the applicant has the opportunity to hear, since I'm reading them. Would you like to hear?
No, I would understand. I just didn't find the copy in the back that was required. I got the agenda and I got the school application here.
Okay. Well, I'm reading them.
It's in
so.
that book. Yes, it is. The whole packet is.
And the video tech, if you'd like to put the PowerPoint back up, the language, it's pretty small up here, but
Page 9.
you can certainly see it. All right, so proposed condition number 1 is the conditional use permit shall be the conditional use permit shall be recorded against all 3 PIDs identified on the application, and no PID may be sold separately without an amendment to this permit. The horse boarding and training facility may be allowed to keep a maximum of 65 horses on the property. The public/customer hours of operation shall be limited to 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily. The applicant/owners may access the operations after business hours to tend to the equine needs. Number 4, the groomsmen quarters may only be used for support of the horse boarding and training operations and shall not be permitted as a separate rental unit on the property. Number 5, the site plan shall be updated to identify the location of the exterior lighting fixtures and specifications of the lights provided to verify compliance with the city's ordinance. Number 6, the applicants shall be required to maintain the feedlot registration with the MPCA and shall provide a copy of the registration at any required renewal periods. Just as a side note, it's my understanding that's every 4 years. Number 7, and we've received some clarification regarding this, so we might want to reword this, but if a manure management plan is submitted to the MPCA, and I would suggest maybe adding something like, or required in the future, A copy of such plan shall also be provided to the city for record keeping. Number 8, all operations on site should meet the MPCA's noise standards and regulations. That's a fairly standard condition of all conditional use permits. Number 9, it shall be the responsibility of the applicants to obtain all necessary permits from Washington County, MPCA, Browns Creek Watershed District, Washington County Soil and Water Conservation Districts, or any other agency having jurisdiction over the subject use. Any future expansion or intensification of the horse boarding and training facility shall require an amendment to the permit. Number 11, no signage is approved as part of this permit. Any future signage shall be subject to the sign ordinance in place at the time of application and may require an amendment to the CUP. Number 12, no public events or shows are approved as part of this permit. If any public events or shows are desired, an amendment to this permit may be required.
We didn't see this ahead of time.
Can you think of any
It's on the website.
It's not on the website. It's just the agenda. I looked also.
Yep, I looked. Somebody have a, can I get on the website right now? I'll show you where it is.
Well, it's not very
Well, a
apparent.
person that wants to go on is gonna look onto the main site, look at the agenda.
Mr.
look at the minutes,
Mr.
and see
Chair,
what's there.
if
We're
you-
not gonna go and look through your entire book to find it.
Not a public discussion.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just would like, there's some comments in the audience. I want to make sure that we're not having open discussion. So we need to make sure that we have things on the record, and I see you guys are discussing as well. So if we could just,
Okay.
so we can get a good record
Okay.
for the minutes. Thank you.
Hey, Jennifer, we had someone speak here as to the number of horses also. You brought up that subject in your points. Are you comfortable with the 60 figure or
65 is
65 figure?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, after researching and speaking with the MPCA, I asked them specifically that question with respect to the pasture area, how many horses, and I have no information that would suggest that that's not a safe, adequate area, as long as the practices are maintained as they've described them. So, unless there's something to suggest to the contrary, I don't have anything that would support a reduction or, what the finding would be.
I would just comment by driving by and looking at the pasture, everything looks pretty good. If Mr. Lanoux has been running as many horses as he says, it's apparently working quite well.
Doing something right, the place looks great.
I'll give you an example. If you were to go down to Manning.
Larry?
I'd like to give you an example of just what horse management and stuff is. If you go down Manning and McCusick, you'll see a big white barn. And you know that used to be the Smith Park property, Esquire Farm, Heart to Heart Stables. It looks very similar to my barn. I designed it. And if you were aware that that's 17 acres, and they run 45 animals in that barn, and you would never know there's a horse on the property. Have you ever driven by there? Very white. It's right on the way to the Gost House. That big white barn along Manning. They run 45 horses in there on 17 acres. They're very good at manure management. And when it talks about grazable acres, I do not rely on my pasture for grazing. Ask the guy that brings the hay. He's happy to come every so often, drop off a wagon and pick up a check. So the grazable, when we talk about grazable acres, and that's when we first got involved in this here, and our city got into a lot of it with grazable acres. We live in Minnesota. We don't have grazable acres 5 to 6 months out of the year. Let's be realistic. It's not about grazable. It's manure management, and that's why I say I'm very careful with my neighbors on that back corner. And I go as far away as I can from any of the people in the back. And I turn it into black dirt, and I like to show you some of the less than 6 weeks, the grass I've got after I spread that and put seed on there. Very good black dirt. If you ever need some, come on over and get a wheelbarrow.
Larry, we have some concerns with all of that, of course, and so what we're going to be doing is when we make a recommendation to the city council, these type of subjects will be added there for clarification. And that's the time.
That's what I'm trying to show you. Like it says, an example is that farm with that it's a very well-run farm, same
We want to
thing,
look
no
like we're doing
CUP.
something too.
Pardon?
We want to look like we're doing something too, Larry.
Yeah.
You know, we
All
make
right.
recommendations for the city council to consider. So thank you.
So question to my fellow commissioners, does anyone have any, anything they want to add to these 12 draft conditions before I make a motion?
Before you do, I think we see something from our attorney.
Sure. A few things for the planning commission to consider here. There's certainly been a lot of testimony tonight from various supporters of the Lanoux Farm about what a great operation it is, and it doesn't really seem like anyone's disputing that fact. One thing I want the planning commission to consider is a conditional use permit, once it's issued, attaches to the land and runs with the land. So even after Mr. Lanoux and his wife are dead, or even after his children are dead, this conditional use permit could potentially still be in existence and in operation. And part of the purpose of this is to have appropriate conditions in place to make sure it remains a quality operation into the future, and so that the city has some ability to go in and regulate it if it falls out of that pristine condition that it's in now. And so having appropriate conditions in place that protect the public, protect the neighbors, are what we're looking at here. And certainly there's been some discussion from some of the neighbors about concerns about horses escaping or manure runoff or things of that nature. And notwithstanding, if you think things are running fine now, you may want to add conditions that address those issues to basically say that those things need to be maintained in a similar good condition as they are now going into the future, so that there is protection for future generations as far as making sure there's regulations in place. That's really what the purpose of this is to make sure that there's a list of requirements that need to be met for this going into the future. Not to say that they aren't being met now, but they need to stay that way. And the more specifics we can have in that regard, I think the better. Another issue that was discussed was, and one of the concerns I think raised by some of the commissioners was to say the diagrams show a barn with only 13 stalls, and how do we protect 65 horses? And there's some discussion about windbreaks and blankets and things of that nature. Basically, there's some duty to provide protection to horses if there's not adequate barn space. And so do we need a condition in here that says the property needs to be maintained with proper lean-to structures or other shelter that protects these animals, these 65 animals potentially that are going to be on this property going into the future? And do you have a condition in here that says whatever lean-to structures that are out there now need to continue to be there? Or there's some discussion about trees, and maybe a tree constitutes a windbreak. Well, nothing in your condition right now, in your conditional use permit conditions right now, would prevent Mr. Lanoux or his family from going out and cutting down every tree on the property. But if you put a condition in here that says there needs to be appropriate windbreaks for that many animals or other shelter continuing to be maintained, those are, I think, some of the additional issues that have been discussed tonight you may want to consider adding to the list so that in the future the good condition of this property remains that way.
Okay. Fine.
In regard to that, I'd like to make a comment.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, obviously that's the point of having public testimony, so that we can hear what concerns are and then appropriately address them within the conditions. So obviously the list that I proposed was a preliminary list based on the information that we had. But I agree with Kevin that we could take a look at how to address some of the concerns that were identified. I don't know for certain, obviously in construction and those, like, there's sort of this term best management practices, if you will, and I'm not sure that that's the appropriate term, but some sort of best practices term, because the conditional use permit lives into perpetuity, so to speak. We wouldn't want to necessarily put in something that says you have to maintain the manure management plan exactly as you've proposed it, because what if something improves in terms of how it's handled in the future? So it seems to me that we would want to have some sort of condition that says, that the manure management plan shall be maintained at the current level or utilizing best practices into the future to correspond to the number of horses, permitted at the facility, or something along those lines. So it allows for the opportunity of, you know, for instance, composting is now what's recommended, but what if there's something else that comes down the path and we won't want them to be precluded from utilizing those things? So the fence, we could add or propose a condition that was that the fence along the pasture, around the pasture, must be maintained in its current condition and kept in good repair. Then that would also follow through to the next owner if that were to happen. And then finally, we could do something sort of similar with respect to best practices too, in terms of appropriate windbreaks or utilizing best practices should be in place at all times to protect horses during inclement weather, or something along those lines. So again, if there's something that's improved over time, that we're not restricting them to not be able to capitalize on those things.
So if we add those conditions that you just mentioned, Jennifer, we can approve with those added conditions without having to delay?
Certainly, if you're comfortable with that, you could certainly amend the conditions and pass it forward. If there's additional conditions, or if there's something else that the city attorney thinks should be added, you could certainly do that, but I don't see why. These pieces don't include needing additional information from the applicant per se. So from that perspective, if you're comfortable with it, you could pass it forward.
Does the Stable Owners Association or somebody else have a guide or rules for running an operation? You know, a booklet or something?
If I may, I'm the attorney, I'm Allison Eklund, I'm the attorney for
Allison.
Larry.
We just want to make sure that it's on the record.
My name is Allison Eklund, I'm the attorney for Larry and Maureen Lanoux, and I'm also the attorney for the Minnesota Horse Council and the Horse Expo, and I created the Stable Owners Association. There are no hard and set standards for best practices, but the University of Minnesota Extension, which has been cited in this hearing, puts out a wonderful newsletter and provides a lot of advice that Minnesota horse owners and stable owners can follow. It's not a standard that I think is appropriate to reference in a legal sense, but it's really good quality information. Minnesota's a great place for horse businesses and horse owners in that environment. So in other words, the information is out there, but I'm not aware of anything particular that you could cite that would create a standard going into the future. And in part because, of course, scientific development and discoveries are always being made. So best practices can change from one year to the next.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, just to clarify though, but I mean, it wouldn't be inappropriate to use the term best practices. That's a term that's it's, like I said, I mean, in building practices, for example, we say best management practices, but to reference best practices would have a meaning, so to speak, so, correct? Okay, I just want to make sure that that's an accurate statement.
Although, from my perspective, I think more specific conditions are more helpful, because to say best management, as some of the commissioners have kind of said today, not everyone's a horse person. And so if you're not a horse person, the term best practices doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. And so, but more specifics about what can and cannot be done, or what should or shouldn't be maintained, I think are helpful to the city and to the property owner to know what the rules are.
Yeah. Yeah, saying do a good job is relative to, who's hearing it.
Right.
But yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Rob, I'd like to make a motion with respect to one of the things that should be done, is his manure pile should be
Can you speak up?
With clay, so that it does not spill over into other people's property.
So you want to add that as a condition?
It should be one of the conditions.
I'm sorry, could you speak up? We can't hear you.
One of the conditions for his manure management should be that it be a pit lined with 3 inches of clay, the proper clay, so that it holds the horse waste till he is able to remove it. Because you don't want it running across your neighbor's property. And the only way you can do it properly is with a pit.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I can't speak to that. In my research, when I looked at composting, that wasn't actually the technique, so perhaps they could speak to that a little bit.
Go ahead.
Want to rephrase the question?
It's not a question, it's a statement.
Okay, rephrase your
My
statement.
statement is that because one of your neighbors has made the statement that she has waste water from the manure composting coming across her property.
Okay, I will address that.
Well,
If I may.
specifically,
I'm
then
in
I
a
have
Browns
to ask-
Creek watershed.
Wait a minute, Mr. Lanoux. I'm asking you to write how you are going to do it, so that we know that it is done and that we can check on it, okay?
Okay.
That's all I'm asking.
Yep, and that's what our watershed districts are all about. That's why I talked to Karen Kill with the Browns Creek watershed prior to this application. And we're hundreds of feet away from that little pond. Now, does water come all the way across? And you're asking me how to keep water out. I'm telling you, the practices we have, we are 4 to 5 times further away from any water body. That is the management program that we have through the watershed. That's what I'm held accountable to. It's what you're held accountable to. If you had been at a...
I'm asking you to prevent urine and what have you from running across her property.
It
Especially
isn't. I got
since it tends to
pictures.
run into the pond that she has said. That's all I'm asking.
I beg to differ with the statement because I have pictures that I've taken just yesterday, as current as yesterday, and we've had rains all along this summer. They're not running across the ponds, and the area of concern she has is not manure. It is composted dirt. There is a difference. But there is an area that goes in there, and there is a far from her property before we get into any wetlands where her pond is, which the DNR built, is probably 400 or 500 feet. It goes through the grasses. That's natural. I mean, if you are concerned, I have talked to the watersheds, and there's not one watershed district that's ever been contaminated by horse manure. They can't cite me a case. So you asked me about it. I'm going to tell you, if you can cite me a case where it's been an issue, it isn't. If you look at Victoria Stations Farm, it used to be a dairy barn. And they used to have 400 or 500 animals within a small area, and has never contaminated a
Just
water
forget
body.
it. I don't need any more. Just forget it.
Sorry you asked.
I was gonna ask,
Go ahead.
I'm gonna ask another question. Speaking of Victoria Station, what was the density of the horses that they had there? Do you know offhand? In the CUP that they had? They had something like, was it 60 horses or something?
Offhand, from memory, I believe, don't quote me, it was like 55 horses. I don't remember.
They have 65 stalls to put a horse in.
And I don't know how large the property is.
I think it was like 50 acres or something like that. I'm just trying to figure, is there a,
Mr. Chair, if we're gonna have discussion, it needs to be at the mic so we can get it recorded.
I'm just trying to understand, do we, looking at what we've done in the past, what we've granted as far as CUPs, horses per acre. Is that something that we need to look at when we look at a new CUP? Or is it just, like we said, just putting in the conditions, more specific conditions, that are going to go on in perpetuity? Or do we look at what we've done in the past and try to get the same kind of horses per acre?
I don't think you're absolutely bound by what was done in the past, but I think it generally provides a good guideline, and I think that, in general, if you pass this request for 65 horses on 30 acres, this will be looked to by future planning commissions and future councils as a potential density allowance for horses. And so is this something that you think is permissible for other properties. I think that is a concern or an issue to think about.
So if I look at, Victoria Station as an example, if you had 60 horses and 50 acres, doing that math, you would say that maybe, 35 horses is more appropriate for 30 acres, because you're a little bit more than one, you're a horse per 0.9 something acres. So if you do that, it's 30, rounding, 35 horses. But how do you, that's what I'm saying, we've got what we've done in the past, and how do you look to set a new standard for horses per acre in the future?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, one comment that I will make, and I don't know the answer in terms of, I haven't done the detailed analysis on each of those CUPs that exist, but you have to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples from the standpoint of how much of that is wetland, how much is it in the prairie, how much, or not prairie, excuse me,
Right.
pasture land. So you have to, before you can do well, there's a gross acreage of this, and then there's this number of horses, you have to actually figure out, are we comparing like to like in terms of availability of property, land, structures, facilities, all of those things. So all of those pieces come into play with respect to how the operations are being conducted on the property.
Yeah.
So, not that that's overly helpful, but
Well, we just assume buildings are buildings, 30 acres versus 50, they all have buildings on them, you just do the road number, or no? You can't do
well, but the what's happening inside the structure, how the operations are occurring, what their practices are for manure management, all of those things can be drastically different across facilities. So that's why a conditional use permit is an effective tool, because it gives you the ability to look at the specific functioning of a parcel and property, as opposed to, and really looking at the unique conditions that exist there. But it would be difficult to say that, well, because there's 30 acres or 50 acres there, then that's exactly the same as the 30 acres here, without doing more analysis to figure that out.
John, if I may?
Yes.
I've got you in 1997. This is a conditional use permit, and it's out at Idlewood Farm. There's about 33 acres there. Their conditional use permit on 33 acres, 62 horses, 100 ducks, 100 sheep or goats, 6 dogs, maximum of 6 horse shows per year, a maximum of 2 sheep herding trials, residential living quarters, 1 single-family residential unit, 1 3-bedroom apartment, 4 efficiency apartments, and applicant is hereby granted a kennel permit. I'm simply asking to operate as I have for 30 years and been a good steward to the land. It's that simple. I've proven I can do good manure management. I've got a $100,000 backhoe I went out and bought so that I can do good management. You aren't going to find anything better. Like I give you an example of the Smith Farm over there. We have guidelines by Minnesota statute. If I am violating and wrecking a water table, they're coming after me. We have a watershed. We have 4 of them in our city. And I've been in contact with Karen. She's been to my properties before. Actually, she's the one that told me the little one that I put out there, I created. And my neighbor asked me if I wanted to do it with the DNR, and I said no, because I'm not going to tie up any land title with the DNR. But I did create that, and that land is drain tile. So yeah, at times water goes across there, and I dare you to find a pond that doesn't get drained at times. But it's according to what rains. Go out to any of our ponds. We're more concerned about horse apples here than we are about the toxic schools in our district. So I'm going to ask you right now that as you compare it, look at my record, what we've done and what we've done. And yes, 65 may be on the high side, but there are times of years we are going to have colts. We might bring in 4, 5, 10 horses at one time for a very short period. I'll guarantee you we'll never have 65 horses there as a permanent operation. But I don't want you coming out counting and you coming out to see, God, did I have 67? I think I got them. Because that's not the purpose of our city. We are going to have times that we might get close to that number for a short period of time. We get a few horses. Maybe the Hoofed Animal Rescue might send me, 5, 6, and it might push me closer to that till we can, get those horses rehomed. So that's what we're asking for. But I can only keep.
Who's going to be counting horses?
Well, evidently you weren't here when Brad Hinseth was, because they certainly were. And I'll guarantee you, the county had there, and we went through that. I'm sure you weren't here when, and that, we had a big debacle 5, 6 years ago, and it got very spendy. And that's when we went to court against a person, and we lost because our city was arbitrary and capricious was the ruling. I'm telling you right now, I've been singled out, and if we go the other direction, it's like Judge Moss said, I'm taking it out of my court, Larry. Nobody's going to come back and go to jail over this, and we'll go into the next deal that determines arbitrary and capricious. That's not what we want. We simply want to be allowed to operate as we have a class action, or a class act deal. If you can find a better run stables, I ask you to find it, because I want to find out how they do it and improve mine. Go ahead, Jerry.
Mr. Chairman, tonight we're talking about an operation that we've seen, we know is run well. It's one that's going for a CUP. Meanwhile, we have a lot of other horse operations in the city that don't require a CUP. And they have an equal opportunity to have a bad run operation where horses can be abused and pastures can be destroyed. So now we're looking way out in the future and saying, what happens if Larry and his family decide that they're not gonna run this place anymore and they get a bad owner in? Well, what do we do about bad owners that come into places that don't have CUPs or whatever now?
Well, the Hoofed Animal Rescue Operation, they will take care of you. There's enough by state statute that will come out and take care of it.
I would like to make a motion that we proceed favorably with the CUP with conditions that we've outlined so far. I'll make that motion.
And let me add to your motion, though, that we also include the conditions that Jennifer talked about, and any more specifics that she can detail for the council.
I'll second that motion.
I would like to see something in there that says, one way or another, to the best of his ability, he will make sure that no manure or urine is running onto his neighbor's property. If that's a berm, fine. Whatever he wants to do so it doesn't happen.
So do we
And I'm not coming out to find out.
So we do want to restate the motion to include that? Is that what you want to do?
I want that as a condition.
Is that okay with you? Is that okay?
So that.
If that's what you want to do and that's your recommendation, then that's okay.
That is a.
So the motion will be to include that statement.
We vote on whether we want that amendment, don't we?
Well, I mean, that's.
We haven't voted on the other conditions.
It's up to us.
Chair and Commissioners, the motion was made to recommend approval as revised.
Right, so it was seconded.
Yes, okay,
So we need to vote on the motion that was.
No, the maker and the second need to agree to the friendly amendment to add that last condition. And you can vote on that if you want that added.
I would ask this body before you talk about manure that do the, and if you move forward, that you write one that says that is in compliant with the watershed. Because if a horse poops on the ground, it is going to pick up and it is going to go through there. That's what the grasses do. We don't have it. You are going to have what you're asking for. If a deer runs through and defecates on a property, it can end up in the neighbors. I think you take and say, I must be compliant with the watershed.
Why don't we take a vote on the additional motion to add the berm? I mean, that's really what we need to do.
We had a motion and a second.
Yeah, we have a motion.
Well,
So, go ahead.
okay, if we're gonna make it a formal amendment to the motion,
Yeah.
Can I
Hey, folks, can we please, no more commentary from the audience?
Except you're talking
Point
about
of
putting a
order.
berm along my
We're voting.
north
voting
side
on
and
this.
south side
Don't
of my
worry.
property, and that's not what I'm asking.
So go ahead. Go ahead. You, Mr. Attorney, you go.
Whatever, before anything happens, with respect to an amended motion, I'll take this as an amendment to the proposed motion, but someone needs to second that amendment, and then you should vote upon the amendment,
Okay.
and whether that passes or not,
Right.
then you go back to the original motion and vote on the original motion.
Right.
And if somebody doesn't
Okay.
second it, it dies.
Is there a second?
I'm voting no.
There's no second, drop it.
Okay.
Okay,
Now,
so
we'll
the
go
amendment
back
is
to
gone.
The original motion that was made and seconded. Now we're going to vote on that. All in favor of passing as written with the conditions that were put in, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, it is approved. We have any more old business? Do we have any old business?
There is no old business. I do have one announcement.
One announcement. We still have a meeting.
I'm
Just
so
for everyone here and those that are watching, the Planning Commission packet and agendas are under the Government tab, under Planning Commission. So, that's it.
Thank you. Second motion. All in favor of adjourning this meeting, say aye. All opposed?